Good afternoon. Welcome to our study session. Mr. McGlynn, could you introduce it, please? Oh, let me just do roll first. Madam City Clerk, could you announce the roll?
Let the record state that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Carlstrom and Councilmember Wysocki.
And that will be the case for the rest of the afternoon and evening. Thank you. Mr. McGlynn.
Yes, item 3.1, study session outlining polling results. Deborah Lochner, Chief Financial Officer, introducing.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Today we have with us the results of our polling that we've done and getting the public opinion on certain things that we want to possibly put in front of the voters. We have with us today Catherine Liu and Jennifer Longley from the Lou Edwards Group, along with Kurt Bello from FM3, and they will be presenting the information. There's just one small piece in the middle that I'll come back and present for you.
Great, thank you. And Council, let's talk a little bit about questions. I'm going to encourage you to ask questions as we move through the presentation. If indeed the question is going to be answered a little bit later in the presentation, the consultants will let us know that so that we can, sit on the question for a few minutes. But those questions that you need clarification on, do not hesitate to ask, because there's a lot of information that will be conveyed today. So, and again, if they know that the question will be answered later in the presentation, then we can just hold on to it. But don't hesitate to ask the questions. Mr. Corsi.
Thank you. I have a question. Is there anything different in this presentation than what we saw last week at the Long Range Financial Policy Subcommittee?
Yeah, I think the primary differences are we caught a couple typos, and I believe the insertion of the slides that Debbie referenced that were the output of the Long-Term Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And the questions appear now to be on the pages.
Correct.
Excellent. Any other questions, Council, before we get started? All right, thank you.
All right. Catherine, do you want to say a few words before I talk for the next hour and 45 minutes?
Thank you. Mayor and Council, city staff, and members of the public. We have a robust presentation planned. Just to state for the record and for the members of the public who are here and listening, the consulting team, as you might imagine, had a difficult and rather complicated task of assessing a couple of different measures. We did so diligently and comprehensively. We look forward to today's discussion. We will answer every question straightforwardly and transparently, and we hope that this session is helpful to everyone concerned. We are going to call it like we see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My name is Kurt Bello from FM3 Research, and I'll be going through the two surveys we conducted on behalf of the city, looking at both of these, the charges that we had. In terms of just a quick review of the goals of these, of the overall research project, was to take an opportunity to get a feel for how voters view life here in Santa Rosa, how they view city government, some specific departments, and to track some of those changes over time to the extent we have some prior survey questions. I think in the other two charges here were to look specifically at renewing Measure P and where voters stood on that prospect, potential ballot measure, and also to look at the complicated issue, which is potentially reforming Measure O. And so those are our sort of three buckets of things we set out to do during the course of this research project. And I have to admit, it was tricky and challenging, and I think Catherine alluded to this. We wrestled with many different ways to go about structuring this research project, and that's not to say that where we landed is the end-all be-all. There may be other ways to approach it, but we think we landed in a place that gave us a pretty robust set of results to look at here and attack the issues from various points of view. I think what we landed on was doing a two-survey structure. So in both cases, we're talking to likely voters, individuals who are A, registered to vote, and B, likely to vote this coming November, which is the vast majority of voters. We did interviews on telephone with the landline and cell phone, and we did two surveys, each of 400 interviews. And demographically, they look basically the same. In the first survey, one of the surveys focused more on the Measure P renewal, and another survey focused more on the Measure O reform. But both of them had elements of questions that looked at general perceptions about life here in the city and city government, and we combined those for the purposes of the presentation. So we essentially have a chunk of results at the beginning, which are general perceptions about the city and city government, and then we go through the Measure P questions, and we'll go through the Measure O questions, and then a couple of things at the end. That's the basic structure. When you're looking at the results themselves, for a survey of 400, the margin of error is essentially 5%, so keep that in mind. Although you'll see that in order to tackle the complex issues we had here, we did some split sampling. And in that case, if you have a sample of 200 interviews, then the margin of error on that is 7%. And I will point out that instances where that is relevant to the analysis.
I would like to comment on the role of survey research as one of several factors that the City Council may consider in its decision-making moving forward. As there appears to be significant public interest at this time in the role of survey research in decision-making, I will say that our organization enjoys a 95% enactment rate for its ballot measures. We continue to rely heavily on opinion research studies, such as those conducted on your behalf, for our strategic advice and recommendations moving forward. I might add, in the June 2016 election cycle, our organization found that reliance on survey research as one of several factors continued to be essential in the advice that we provided to our clients.
Thank you. Ms. Combs?
Thank you very much. I just wanted clarification on the 400 interviews. Did we include data from individuals who partway through the interview declined to continue? If they did the first half, was data included from the first half?
No, we only included completed interviews all the way through.
Thank you.
Okay. So the first set here of slides, as I promised, talk about perceptions about life here in the city. The old Gallup question that's been asked since the 20s or 30s, the right direction, wrong track question. We've asked that a couple times in prior surveys for the city, both in 2008 and in 2010. We asked them again here, and you'll see the green bars here represent the percentage of respondents who indicated that the jurisdiction in question was headed in the right direction, and the red bar, wrong track. So you'll see that, by and large, voters here in Santa Rosa are pretty positive about and pretty optimistic about life in California, the county, and in the city itself. Specifically looking at the city, you see that 56% of likely voters feel like the city's headed in the right direction, and about a third, at 34%, are a little more concerned. This is a pretty big improvement from the last couple times we conducted surveys for the city. Well, granted, a lot of time has passed between those, but you'll notice that that was essentially a flipped dynamic back in 2010. So voters in general feel more optimistic about life here in Santa Rosa than they did about 6 years ago. The next question here is we asked some what we call favorable questions. So we read in order here, random order here, about the city government overall, the city council, and three of the key departments that we asked about in prior surveys, and in council with city staff were the most important to ask about in this particular survey, and asked respondents to indicate whether they held a favorable or unfavorable opinion of them, or a more neutral opinion, or those light gray bars on the right-hand side were people who said, I don't really feel comfortable voicing an opinion one way or another. And you'll notice here that the three departments we asked about all enjoyed very favorable ratings here. So in excess of 3/4 of respondents or more said I've got a favorable opinion of both police department, fire department, and the rec and park department. So those are very strong endorsements for those particular departments amongst voters. City government overall at 54 favorable to 26 unfavorable is a 2-to-1 ratio. So again, a fairly positive response there. And the city council kind of in the same ballpark, about half a positive point of view and about 3 in 10 a little less favorable. We have we have the ability to compare some of these data points going back a little bit. So looking at the two questions we asked about government overall and the city council, you'll see that opinions have been bounced around a little bit here, but it kind of been in the same range since 2008. So roughly-ish half of voters have held a favorable opinion of city government in the last 3 times we've asked this question, and also around kind of the same around the city council, maybe just a tiny tick lower than that, but sort of in the same range. And when it comes to the specific departments we asked about, fire, police, and Rex and Park, those numbers have been also consistently strong and positive over the course of the last 8 years. So those were sort of the big impressions. Then we asked a little more specific questions about some of the service delivery in the city. We didn't have time to do a full in-depth customer, essentially clients service satisfaction survey that we might do in a citizen satisfaction survey, but we asked a few questions to get at least a feel for the reactions there. In this case, we have a majority of voters here who feel like the city is doing an excellent or good job providing services at 52%, although I'll note that very few are in the excellent category. It's primarily in the good category. And then about another third said just fair, and 1 in 10 and 11% said poor. We put that just in front of the fair just to give it a little bit of a different negative tinge, so we have 2 categories on each side. But I think the big takeaway here is you have, by and large, positive reactions to the services the city is providing, but not a lot of intensity on either side of the spectrum. Not a lot of people saying excellent, not a lot of people saying poor, mostly in the middle, tending towards the positive side. When we asked a similar question about managing the city's budget and finances, the results were a little more mixed. You'll see that the excellent good numbers at 38%, just about as many said fair, and 15% said poor, and another 14% were undecided. So a little more uncertainty about the financial management here, and so a little more of maybe a mixed result here. The intensity, though, is actually in this case maybe a tiny bit more on the poor side than the excellent side. By and large, we often see city governments have a approval rating of whatever it is, and then we ask about the fiscal management. It's not uncommon to see that come down a little bit. As a general rule, voters are suspicious of government at all levels to some extent, particularly in their financial management, so it's not a particularly surprising result to see. However, that being said, we also said, well, does the city need additional funds to keep providing the services that you need and expect? The language we asked there is actually the italicized language, and you'll see that a very strong majority, 59%, said there's at least some need or even great need for additional funding for the city. So you've got a situation where there's a lot of positive feelings about city government overall, specifically about some of those departments, feel like services are being provided at an adequate level, maybe a little more nervousness about financial management, but at the same time, a general acknowledgement that the city needs additional funding, although about a third of voters indicated they did not feel that to be the case. We also went through a series of questions in a serious issues or problems battery, and we read in random order, and we have 2 slides in this series here, a list of things that may be considered problems in the city. And we asked respondents to indicate how serious of a problem they thought they may be on a 4-point scale. Either extremely serious problem, very serious, somewhat or not too serious of a problem. We phrase this as a list of problems, and so it's pretty easy for someone to say it's a somewhat serious problem. So we tend to focus on the more intense reactions, extremely and very, and those are represented by the red bars there, and we've summarized those on the right-hand side. And you'll see there is a very clear prioritization here between what things voters are most concerned about, given the list of options we presented to them here, and it has to do with housing, both homelessness and the inability for working families to afford a place to live here in the city. We split sampled a few of these to test different ways of phrasing them, but they all kind of came back the same. We've got roughly 7 in 10 voters who feel some level of intensity of concern about issues related to housing here in Santa Rosa. The other items, as we go down the list, you'll notice that the red and pink bars are getting smaller and those green bars are getting a little bit bigger. We have gang and youth violence, street conditions, and traffic congestion on local roads and streets. The second slide in the series, you'll notice that those pink and red bars start to get awfully small towards the bottom, and the green bars are getting much bigger. And this is where we looked at the city's budget, state budget cuts, concerns about inefficiency in government and the local economy. Far fewer people are particularly concerned about them. And at the bottom of the list here, less than 1 in 5 expressed intense concerns about park maintenance or 911 emergency response times. As we will see as we go through the survey results, though, just because one of these items is not seen as particularly concerning doesn't mean that they don't think it is a high budget priority. You'll see on this slide, 911 emergency response times is at the bottom of the list in terms of concerns. We're going to go through some slides where we ask about potential spending priorities, and we'll see that it's actually at the top of the list. That is a pretty common dynamic, frankly. A number of these we've asked over the years, so we have an opportunity to go back and see if concern levels have increased, decreased, or stayed relatively similar. In terms of traffic congestion, both on local streets and highways and freeways, it's basically largely gone down from a peak in 2008. Local traffic congestion is a little more concerning than it was in 2010, but not nearly at the same levels as in 2008. Looking at fiscal issues that more directly impact the city, concern about the city's budget was relatively consistent in 8 and 10, and has decreased notably in recent years. Concerns about state budget cuts and generally waste and inefficiency in local government have also declined at similar rates.
Question on that. The asterisk before the city's budget, what does that refer to?
I believe the way it was phrased in the prior survey was the city's budget deficit or something along. I may have that a little bit off, and so we changed the language a little bit, but we've included the tracks in here just because it was as close as we could get for comparison purposes. And if you look at it, it's pretty consistent with the other trends on these other items.
Yeah, thank you.
When it comes to housing, though, the cost of housing, we didn't ask about it in 2010, but in 2008 we asked about it, and it was right at the same level, almost exactly the same. So this has been a persistent concern. Some of these other concerns, it looks like have dissipated over time, but the concern about housing has not waned in the intervening 8 years. Looking at gang and youth violence, that's seen a steady decline in the level of concern, and maybe not surprisingly, the local economy. Voters are, broadly speaking, more bullish, or at least less concerned than they were in the past. About the crime, though, and given the fact that we're asking specifically about Measure O issues, we did ask a couple of questions that were a little more specific to crime rates and the perception about them. And basically, we asked, did you think that overall crime has increased or decreased in the last few years? Or do you feel like gang-related crime has increased or decreased in the last few years? And as we see here, and is sometimes the case, there's a distinction in those perceptions. About half of voters, 51%, feel like overall crime has increased in the last few years. Well, much more mixed results when it comes to gang-related crime. About evenly divided in terms of whether people think it's gone up or gone down.
Were there any questions related to how people form that opinion?
No, this is the only question we asked on this topic.
So it's just as stated there is no further conversation?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And I will apologize, there was a great number of topics to try to get in here, so we had to keep things pretty concise to keep focus on Measure P and O. I think one of the things here, and we didn't test this specifically, but if I had to hypothesize, and some of the other questions later in the survey give glimpses of this, I think that the property-related crimes may be explaining a little bit about why the overall crime rate has seemed to be going up relative to the gang-related crime rate. Other communities were seeing that too. The property-related crimes, thefts, and things of that nature have become more concerning. Okay, so that concludes the first part of the presentation, going through perceptions about the city. So,
Council, any questions at this point? Burning questions? All right, let's go on. Thanks, Kurt.
Great. Okay, so the first next topic here will be about Measure P renewal. And so we went about it testing 2 different ways. One is that let's just do a straight renewal. 1/4 cent, not changing anything. We're renewing the sales tax. It's still general purpose, and we're going to keep it ongoing until ended by voters, so there will be no sunset for it. That's one track. And half the respondents were asked about that. The other half were asked about basically the same measure, except instead of a 1/4 cent, it's going to be revised up to be 1/2 cent, but still the same sunset or lack of sunset in the same services it's funding. And so 200 voters were asked about each of those, and over the course of the survey, they were asked about the same two measures all the way through. But there are obviously, since the spending provisions are the same, we can ask a lot of similar questions of the full 400 in that survey to get the robustness of the full sample. I think the one item I just want to highlight here, which is the third bullet here, is that since a general purpose measure here would have a majority vote threshold, assuming it is put on a ballot at the same time as a regularly scheduled city council election. So that would be this November or November 2018. So we came up with some hypothetical ballot language here that's based a little bit based on Measure P's original language, but updated a little bit. For those of you who pay a lot of attention to local finance measures, the two major differences here, historically speaking, are there was a state bill passed last year called AB 809, which requires that for measures of this nature, you have to make sure that you're explicitly saying something about the duration of the measure. You can't just be silent on it. And you have to have an estimate of the amount of tax revenue that it generates on an annual basis. And so those are new assertions in here. So you see that a quarter cent would raise roughly $8 million a year, and a half cent, $16 million a year. But by and large, these are essentially the same ballot language that was tested. And the result here is strong majority support for both of these items, although there are some differences here that I will highlight. The way we ask these vote questions is we first ask an initial, would you vote yes or no? And then we push people, or is that definitely or probable? And then if your initial reaction is to be undecided, we ask if you're leaning one way or another. So if that gives us a full spectrum here, and if you're truly undecided, we essentially asked you twice. And you'll note here that the undecided voters here are a pretty small proportion of overall voters here, so it's a sales tax. People can kind of get it and make a decision on it pretty easily. It's not a complicated mechanism. You'll see that at half cent, we're at 60 to 35, and the quarter cent, we're at 66 to 29. So just about 2/3 indicate they would support extending Measure P exactly as is, and about 3 and 5 indicate they would support a half cent measure replacing Measure P. So in aggregate, there's a little more support for the quarter cent. I would also add that in intensity, support is a little higher for the quarter cent as well. If you notice that the definitely yeses for the quarter cent are 37% versus 33% for the half cent. That kind of makes some intuitive sense. The quarter cent is keeping everything the status quo, and the half cent is increasing things a little bit. But this is where voters started off in the course of our survey with keeping in mind a 7% margin of error. So we went through a couple of structural elements here of how the survey could be construed. One of which was, well, let's make very clear that this was this measure doesn't have a sunset, but what if it had a 10-year sunset, or what if it had a 20-year sunset? And we blended the results for the two measures here just to get enough sample. And we see that support at 10 and 20 years was actually a tiny bit lower than the support we saw for the measure without a sunset. I think this probably goes to some voters may be potentially tired of being on the carousel of measures over and over again. At the same time, it may also be, well, this has been in place for a while, let's just maintain what we have and keep it, and there's no necessarily need to shorten that length again. The results suggest that there are probably other considerations that voters think are more critical to whether or not to renew Measure P than necessarily the length of the measure. The next set of items here are how money could be spent from Measure P, renewal measure. And we have a similar question that we'll ask for Measure O in a moment. So this is a wide spectrum of potential spending priorities because it's a general purpose measure. And we read in random order, and respondents heard roughly half of this list here. We couldn't read all these to everybody. Their ears would start bleeding a little bit. But we asked them on a 4-point scale, how important would it be to you that money was spent in this particular manner? Extremely important, very important, somewhat, or not too important. And once again, our instinct is to focus more on the intense reactions, the extremely's and varies, because it's fairly easy for someone to say, that's at least somewhat important. So let's see which of these spending priorities generate the most intense reactions. This is interesting not only from the context of a Measure P renewal, But going forward and for other budget prioritizations, this could be a helpful tool to see where voters would like to see their marginal dollar spent. And you'll notice here on this first slide that you'll see clean drinking water right at the top of the list, and right behind that, those emergency response times. And if you recall, those were items that were seen as very low levels of concern, but here they're seen as very high levels of spending priority because people want to protect and maintain those response times. Other items in this first tier here were at least 70% of respondents indicated that this was either an extremely or very important spending priority. How to deal with fixing and maintaining streets, helping make housing a little more affordable, other items related to public safety in terms of just general protection services and gang-related services. And then a couple bigger picture things. Actually, it was interesting, bubble to the top, kind of a categorical thing, maintaining the city's long-term financial stability. It's not the same, it's not as specific as dealing with gang activity in the city, but that as a bigger picture goal seemed to resonate with voters, as well as keeping the money here locally and not having money that's sent to the county or sent to the state before returning back to the city.
Kurt, just a clarifying question on the 911 emergency medical calls. The first question talked about whether they thought it was important. Well, if they hadn't used it for a while, no one was messing with it, then probably everything's fine. It's not really high on my list. But this says protecting. So that suggests that the city might be thinking of doing something about the 911 calls, and that could just naturally elevate the concern of the community and bring it up to that 86%. Is that a reasonable assumption?
I think that's a fair way of reading it. I mean, you're talking about even this word maintaining it suggests that in the absence of a measure, then maybe they wouldn't be maintained.
Right.
But I think the initial question we asked was, are you concerned about, is it a serious problem, those response times? And most voters feel like it's not a problem, they're okay for the most part.
But leave it alone.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The next kind of middle-ish tier here are all items that were seen as extremely very important, at least in the 60s. You'll see those dark green bars have gotten a little bit smaller, though, and now the pink bars, these somewhat important, are starting to get a little bit bigger, although nothing is seen as not too important on this slide. And now we get into senior and youth programs, library services, let's see, a couple other items here, programs reducing homelessness, water conservation issues, park issues. These are all items that seem to be sort of a tier below what we saw on that first slide, which was a lot of public safety and road issues, although some homeless issues and housing issues were on that slide as well. And then the last slide in this 3-slide series, now you start to see those pink bars get a little bit bigger and the green bars get much smaller. And so some of these items here were, no one's rejecting them out of hand, but they're just comparatively lower priorities. And you see some of the items here at the bottom of the list dealing with bike paths, trails, cultural activities, budget cuts, and some items at the bottom there are all seen as less important spending priorities.
I have a question about, were these all the questions that are all the categories that you said were listed?
Correct.
And how was this list developed?
We started off from looking at the prior research that we did for the city and used some of the same items there, and then we had a variety of meetings with people leading up to this, and we tried to take those into account, and then we sat with city staff and had them comb over to make sure we were getting the right spectrum of services.
So, because I had a question, there's only one specific position, the one increasing salaries to recruit and retain skilled police officers, but we don't ask about any other employee positions specifically in the entire city. Can you tell me a little bit how that's the one classification that made it to the questionnaire?
Yeah, I mean, I think that without getting into so you're talking about staffing levels specifically?
Well, I'm just saying there's only one specific city job classification that's mentioned in the question. In other words, if it was Measure O, we're not asking about the same question about gang prevention manager or fire. So I'm just wondering how police was the only one that got queried about.
Yeah.
As I recall, at one juncture, that was a specifically suggested item that was tested. And as the mayor and council is aware, not only did the mayor and council have input into the development of the questionnaire, but additional stakeholders in a manner that did not undermine or otherwise jeopardize the integrity of the questionnaire.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means. In other words,
What that
If
means,
it's related to
council
measure,
member,
if it's-
is
if-
that we got input from people, and that input is reflected in the question series asked. I might also mention that the question series is asked in a rotated manner to eliminate any bias whatsoever.
I understand the process. We
Sure,
go for
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next set of slides here will go through how voters on the phone reacted to arguments both in favor of a Measure P renewal measure and opposed to it, sort of hypothetical things that someone could hear in the community were something placed on the ballot. And we have at the appendix of the slides, we actually have what those specific arguments were. But the net impact of them we're showing here on this slide. So for the half-cent measure, started off at 60%. We went through, here's reasons why you might want to vote yes for something, goes up to 66. Here's reasons why you might want to vote no on it. It goes back to 59. Essentially, support for the half cent ended up at the same place it started. So roughly 3 in 5 voters indicated they'd vote yes for the half cent measure. The quarter cent measure follows a somewhat similar dynamic, but things get much higher. So this quarter cent starts off at 66, goes all the way up to 78, and then comes back down to 71%. So it actually ends up a little bit higher than where it started off from. So both these measures are supported consistently throughout the course of the survey by majorities of survey respondents. Quarter cent started off higher and ended up higher than the half cent.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm going back to looking at the survey questions, which, as you know, we didn't see before they went out. And I appreciate there were reasons why you made that decision. But I'm interested that the housing questions related to make housing more affordable to working families and they appear to both be provide services question. Provide services to make it more affordable or provide services to reduce homelessness. That's not really the same as build more housing. Is there a reason why we went toward the provide services way of asking those questions?
Yeah, well, I let staff speak in here, but I know that we did ask a question, at least a hypothetical question about an actual bond measure itself, which could go towards actual building. And we'll get to that later on.
That's coming down the road, but not based on this provide services piece.
So I don't think it was an intentional omission, but it just got to a point where we're in a 20-minute conversation around the density of a particular topic we can dive into. Again, this is to give a glimpse into where motivations might lie. It isn't necessarily meant to be a comprehensive statement about a particular endeavor.
Right.
And so, again, I don't think that wasn't, there wasn't an intentional weighing of services versus bricks and mortar in this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The next series here, I think, oops, I will scoot out of the way.
You don't have to get up. I'll take Catherine's seat. So we inserted a couple city slides in the middle of their presentation just to remind the council how this whole process started. The whole process of doing the polling came about from a recommendation from the Long-Term Financial Policy Subcommittee. The overall recommendation from that subcommittee was to provide, they had a preferred option on adjusting the baseline calculation instead of using CPI. Too many budget discussions in the last few days. So instead of using the CPI, which is currently in the Measure for Measure O calculation of general fund baseline, the recommendation was to have baseline track as a percentage of the general fund based on the fiscal year 2015-16 percentages. This allows the program funding to go up and down with economic conditions. And so this is really redefines the The intention is actually to manage the fluctuations of those public safety budgets. They continued to grow during the recession while we struggled in balancing our budget and a baseline that was tracking with a number that continued to increase, although very small in a couple of those years. The overall recommendation does not change the ability for the council to fund below baseline with 6 votes. It just specifically redefines how we calculate the baseline as a percentage of the general fund as opposed to a growth every year based on CPI.
I just want to note that it also doesn't prevent the council from funding above the baseline.
That's correct. So then I just added, so we had a chart that we provided back when we discussed this in November. I've just done that in separate charts so that you can see what the actual baseline requirement is and where the budget was and where the recommendation lies for each one of those programs. So for the police department, it was at 34.3%. For the fire department was at 23.7%, and for gang prevention intervention programs, it was 0.4%. So that is the overall recommendation that started this project, and I'll turn it back over to Kurt and the team to discuss Measure O.
All right, thank you, Debbie. A nice break from my droning voice. Why don't we get on to Measure O? And this was a little more challenging for the consulting team to figure out an approach to. And as I noted up front, there are a lot of different ways to approach this, but we landed on something that we thought made sense given the wide spectrum of opinions and thoughts that we collected during our initial analysis phase. So basically what we ended up doing was, let's test 2 hypothetical measures. One would be, let's pretend we're trying to renew Measure O. Now, granted, that doesn't have to happen until 2024, so this is nothing you have to contemplate at this point in time, but if we were to put straight Measure O on the ballot right now and renew it, how would voters react to that? It had very strong support when it initially passed. I think the supposition was that that's probably still in the same ballpark, but let's see. And so we try to craft language that reflected the fact that it was not improving things, it was maintaining those improvements that were already made and dealing with some of the AB 809 requirements to be a little more specific about the amount of money it raised. And let's have that as one pathway in the survey. The other pathway would be a reform measure, which doesn't touch the tax itself or how those tax dollars are allocated, but specifically goes at reforming the baseline public safety spending formula, as well as increasing a little bit of the oversight responsibilities and capabilities of the oversight committee. And this let us have a look at both of those as independent measures in their own silos, but also at the same time compare them essentially head to head during the course of the survey and in our analysis. And I think that multiple times in the survey, though, we were able to get past the measures that we're talking about and actually ask questions specific to the reform ideas and concepts being contemplated and ask for more head-to-head comparisons with the respondents on the phone themselves. So it's a little tricky to understand, but hopefully when we walk through some of the slides, you see the verbiage we use, it'll make a little more sense. One note about the vote thresholds here, and I will allow the city staff to tell me if I'm completely off base here, but our understanding is that Measure O, to renew that, it's a special purpose tax, it would require has a 2/3 vote threshold. So a renewal measure, a continuation measure would require that 2/3 vote. It's our understanding that a recent legal opinion obtained by the city suggests that if the reform measure did not touch the tax mechanism itself and simply was looking to amend the items that we've contemplated here, at least conceptually, that would likely only require a majority vote threshold, although it has not been tested out specifically, but this is the initial interpretation. All right, I'm getting the yes. Okay, I got it right. I am not an attorney. Okay, so in terms of Measure O, one of the questions we asked in the survey was, well, how familiar are you with Measure O? And instead of just saying Measure O, which itself would probably be unfamiliar, we gave people the existing 1/4 cent public safety tax, sales tax. So with that, respondents to the survey gave the answers you see on this slide here, which is about a little more than 2 in 5. 42% said they're at least somewhat familiar. Another third said not to or not at all familiar. Another quarter were a little more honest and said, I have no idea, I don't know. So that's the gray bar at the bottom. So if you lump that 24% and that 34%, you've got a majority of people who respond to the survey, a majority of likely voters who don't really know anything about Measure O. If you look at those individuals who said that they're familiar with it, there's a little bit of desirability bias built into questions like this. You never want to sound ignorant about a topic, and so we tend to focus on the most intense reactions that are the very familiar. And so our interpretation of the results here is a little more than 1 in 10 voters consider themselves very familiar with Measure O and could probably tell you something about the baseline calculations or something of that nature. Maybe another 3 in 10 that's somewhat familiar may know that this thing exists and maybe know a little bit about it here and there, but probably don't know the level of detail that we went into in this survey. So let me get to the 2 measures that we tested here. So first, this is the retest or the continuation language. It borrows language from the original Measure O, changes it to talk about maintaining as opposed to, I think some of the language was improving along those lines, because now we have these improvements baked in to the service levels here. We want to maintain them. And also talks about essentially in this particular version would get rid of a sunset and make it continue until it's, strike that. This actually assumes that we're renewing it in the current time frame up to 2024, just for conceptual purposes here. Pretty much the same sort of concept of Measure O as originally had at the beginning. And then the reform language was a little bit trickier. So we heard what a lot of proponents of reform were stating the purpose of, and they said, well, we want to basically have new minimum public safety funding levels in order to free up additional money for non-public safety services. So we stated those 2 goals in here, and then talked about the 2 things that would change. Essentially, the formula would change, and we didn't get into any of the specifics here. We just said amend and reduce, because that's functionally what it would be, and then talked about enhancing the citizen oversight. Because in 75 words, trying to describe the purpose and these 2 mechanisms would be really quite challenging. So this is more the concept of, there's a measure in front of you that's going to reduce the minimum funding levels of public safety, free up money for other things, and it's going to increase oversight.
I just want to weigh in here that I disagree with your proposition here. It does amend the formula. It does not reduce. And in fact, in this year's budget, if this reform language was in place that was talked about by the long-term financial subcommittee, it would increase the public safety budgets from the baseline. In fact, for the fire department, it's 5% above the baseline. So I just want to point that out, that the question was asked, do you want to reduce the city's voter-approved minimum? What we're doing with the voter-approved minimum, the baseline, is fixing it, is setting it as a percentage of the general fund, not reducing it.
Okay. Okay. So here is where support landed for both of these measures here. So for the continuation measure, support was at 62% yes, and for the reform measure, it was at 57%. So keeping in mind the respective potential vote thresholds here, the continuation measure is a little bit shy of the 2/3 vote threshold. The reform measure is just right around the margin of error, outside or above a majority vote threshold, assuming that is the threshold that they can pass by. You see a little more intensity also for the continuation measure at 35% definitely yes, compared to 24% definitely yes for the reform measure. Now, we understood that this ballot language would be tricky here, and so We tried our best in a concise manner here to try to explain some of what was going on here. And I understand that we worked with city staff, and our understanding was that the reform would actually result in a reduction. In other words, that would be where the additional funds would be freed up for other types of services. So that's baked into this explanation, whether it's universally agreed upon or not. That's the information that we're working with here. But you'll see that we try to...
And if I understand correctly, at no point was the citizen oversight question asked separately? It was always asked within the context of reduction?
Correct. We didn't isolate that. Yep. So the first paragraph tries to explain the background about the measure. It was passed with 78% support a while back, and here's a couple things that it did. The second paragraph tried to get into the minimum funding levels and how they can be, how they are adjusted over time. And then those who heard about the conceptual retest or the continuation got that third paragraph, and those who heard about the reform measure got that fourth paragraph there. And then we came back here and asked, well, haven't heard this information, how would you vote? And you'll see that support for the continuation measure actually dropped a few points. It dropped 7 points down to 55%, and support for the reform measure actually increased up to 60%. So we see a little bit of movement there. Although both measures are still well above majority support, there's a little bit of movement after we spent some time providing the background information. Recall that a lot of these voters weren't that familiar with Measure O, so just hearing that even that first paragraph probably gave them more background information than they had going into the survey initially. All right, so looking at a few of the structural elements here, and this I think is maybe the most interesting question for me personally in the survey. We read these 2 paragraphs to respondents, to all 400 people in the survey. They all at this point had heard some background information about what Measure O is. And we rotated them in different order, so it would say some to the first paragraph and other to the second paragraph. And essentially one is the minimum public safety funding levels are working just fine. The council has flexibility to change them. There's no need to change anything. The other one says these are a problem, particularly if there's recessions. It just shouldn't be a problem that the council has to face almost every year, and it's potentially cutting into available funds for other types of services that aren't public safety related. So the two big threads that we heard from all of our various conversations with a number of stakeholders here. And we said, well, which one is closest to your own opinion? And it's clear as mud here. It's at 46 to 46, split right down the middle. And oftentimes what's interesting here, though, I think, and I'm reading a little bit into this, is when we see a forced choice that's evenly divided like this, we often see a lot of people in that don't know category because they have a hard time making up their mind. This suggests that there are some people who are more entrenched in these positions and they can make up their minds and they feel like it should be reformed or shouldn't. But there are even numbers of those individuals. At least given the background information we provided them in this survey. In terms of how the funding minimum funding levels the formula could be amended here, we looked at 2 different options. One which was basically pegging it off of a percentage of the current general fund. The other one was looking at a 5-year average. There's really no difference. There weren't very many intense opinions about it. A lot of people said it wouldn't make a difference. If you recall, in the 75 words that we asked, we didn't bother trying to spell it out because we didn't really know how to do that in a concise manner or what the consensus would be. This suggests that those people who are support or oppose the reforming Measure O baseline formula are probably more, that the concept is more important to them than the details. And I think that some of the details about how it may be figured out here might be your judgment should you pursue something like this. The specifics about these things, I don't think voters are too worked up over.
Can I ask a question? Opinions were asked of the folks about the whole CPI thing. Was any information provided to any of the people either that know or don't know what the author's intent was when it was put into the measure? In other words, the background, why did they choose to tie it to the CPI?
Yeah, well, we get into that when we went through the positive and negative argumentation. And so at the back of the survey in the appendices, you will see some arguments. And so there was a statement saying this is working just as intended to insulate the public safety spending against economic downturns. And that was an argument used in favor of used in opposition to the reform. So.
Okay, it's complicated, and I think I had this conversation with you prior to the survey. It's a challenging concept to understand, and especially given the quarter of people who don't know about the Measure O.
Yeah.
It's just that there's an intent why the authors put that in there, and how do you equate that? We understand what the impact has been, but understand the reasoning, I think, could be sometimes helpful for people to form an opinion about whether to continue it or to reform it. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, the next question here was a similar question structure that we saw a while back. And it was the spending priorities and similar sort of scale, extremely important, very important, somewhat, or not too important. And you'll notice here that we have a few slides in this series as well, and you'll see that this is all public safety oriented. This is the Measure O survey, so we focused on public safety. So we got into a lot more granular detail about the public safety spending areas here. And you'll see that in this first slide here, the top ones are virtually all about emergency response, and also fire protection services, broadly speaking, and dealing with violent crime. Now we see those dark green bars get a lot smaller here, or start to get smaller here, and we get into more of the property-related crimes and a number of programs related to youth as well. So after-school recreation programs, after-school tutoring and mentoring programs, and partnerships with non-governmental organizations. The last slide here in the series, and now you see those pink bars get a little bit bigger. So none of these things are again rejected, but these are seen as comparatively lower priorities. The nuisance sort of stuff, right? Code enforcement, graffiti, those things didn't seem to be as big a spending priority as some of the other public safety areas.
Can you clarify for me again how we go from, or how you think that we go from, like slide 15, where we see very high or very serious problem ratings for something that then reappears as low, or for example, the 911 calls, they appeared low in the problem area,
Sure.
but high in the priority area.
Yeah.
How is that, is something similar?
Yeah. This is
I don't understand.
a very
that?
common dynamic. We see this in a lot of communities, regardless of where their perceptions about crime rates are. And it is, if I am worried about crime in my community and it's a big problem for me, I want to see more money spent on addressing it. And I'm worried about response times. I pick up the phone and I'm concerned that no one's going to come in a timely manner. I want more money spent getting people here faster.
Right.
At the same time, if I feel pretty good, I feel like the crime rates are relatively low. I had an experience where I called and the fire department came because my dad had a heart attack and they came quickly. That's great. I want money to go to that to maintain those response times, and I don't want those times to go up. And so we see this dynamic in communities with low and higher crime rates where there's almost always a high priority spent on maintaining those response services.
How do you advise cities that have something, any issue in our city housing, who have something that people are identifying as a high need or a high problem area, but are not listing it as a priority? How do you advise communities to move forward when you find results like that?
So let me see if I can understand. So is this something that the council or the staff has identified as a high need area and the community's not identified?
The community actually has identified,
Right.
for example, in this case, housing as a high level of concern. It was a very high level of concern. They are not identifying it as a high priority. And so or at least they're identifying it in the 60-70% range priority, not where some of these other items are.
Well,
So I'm just asking, when a pollster sees that, how do they interpret that in terms of what their polling means? What does it mean when a poll says, we're really worried about this and it's not a priority?
Well, let me answer a little bit, and I think Catherine has some additional thoughts here. I would say that I'm going to make everyone's eyes glaze over here by skipping backwards a bit.
It was slide 15 where I'm puzzled at
Well,
how we
I want to
interpret
go.
that.
I want to go here. I think this is the other number you mentioned, which is slide 23.
Yes.
Which you see here that providing services to make homes more affordable to working families. It still seems a pretty high spending priority here. It's not quite as high as some of the public safety items here, but it is well above some of the other items we tested here in the general purpose sense. So I would not say that it is a low priority. I would say that it is a notch or so below maybe some of the other things like emergency response times, clean water, and sort of in the same ballpark as some of the other items here. You know, fixing streets, repairing potholes, has a little more intensity, frankly. So it's in that same range. So I wouldn't say that's a low priority.
No, but there is a 16-point differential between, and again, these were all randomized, between providing clean drinking water and services to make housing more affordable to working families. I mean, the bottom line is that it's not possible in the surveys that were done, because of the focus of both surveys, to really zero down on the housing services, housing bond, homeless issues in the manner perhaps that is necessary when looking towards developing comprehensive policy or a comprehensive ballot measure. The other reality is that it is often different what people are willing to pay for. So we frequently find, just to use a different type of example, I hear from a lot of my cities, well, everyone wants more sports fields, or everyone wants these parades maintained. And then we poll for them and we discover that it's true, but we also find that people are not quite willing to pay for those items if they have to pick and choose what items to pay for. So certainly in the myriad of issues evaluated in the survey, there are undoubtedly a number of policy issues that we could drill down further in coming months or years on behalf of the city.
Okay.
Excuse me. Back on slide 50.
50 or 15?
50,
50.
where we stopped.
Great.
It talks about code enforcement in the headline on that slide, but I don't see the question asked. Was a question asked about code enforcement?
I don't think that we're in some conversations about code enforcement, and I wish I would have caught this headline prior to. I think I would have advised the team to rephrase this title, just because we've been talking about a comprehensive strategy and we're involved in a comprehensive strategy that may be more encompassing than some of the items on this list. I think a more apt description came from Kurt when he talked about some nuisance issues that may be code enforcement items, but I don't want to overstate that. And I actually, that was one of the first things that popped in my head when I was viewing this round of the presentation. I see where the question is, but I don't think we weren't doing a deep dive on that topic.
All right.
Consider me fairly admonished for an inappropriate title there. But you're right, nuisance related was what the focus was. Yeah. So in terms of the pro and con argumentation, we did the similar thing for these Measure O measures. So first up is the continuation measure. And you see here that we started off at 62% support, and after the explanation, it actually dropped to 55, but quickly rebounded back to 64 after some positive arguments, and then after some statements that were a little more critical of the measure, it came back down to 61. So essentially, after a pretty healthy exchange back and forth and an explanation, it ended at 61, started at 62, not much of a change in either the yes vote or the no vote. For the reform measure, the dynamic was a little bit different. It steadily climbed when we explained more about it. We went through some positive arguments in favor of it, but then took a pretty good 10-point hit when we came back with some criticisms. So it suggests a little bit of a different dynamic there, and it ended just a few points less supportive than where it started off, and with a 7% margin of error. It was within that margin of error of a majority vote measure, which would be somewhere between plus or minus 7%.
Can I ask about your critical statements? I know we live in a fact-free political society often, but is that the type of critical statements that you were testing here? For instance, one of your critical statements said that the reform measure guarantees that public safety budgets will be reduced. I can see if somebody came out against a reform measure that might be something that would be said, but it's not a true statement.
Yeah.
Do you test untrue statements? Is that the goal here?
I wouldn't say it's our goal, but we like to try to reflect statements that may be exchanged in the community dialogue out there in the public. And if they are shading a little bit of the reality of some of the facts, but other things that very much could be said in mailers, could be said in op-ed articles to the paper. We want to reflect those types of statements because that is the reality in which a measure might be contemplated. So we try to respect and reflect all the different types of arguments that we heard and read about some of the issues and put them in here. And there may be some debate about some of the factual accuracy of all these, but that was the type of rhetoric that we thought could conceivably be heard in the community.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood that. And I would maintain that that's more than shading it. It's an outright falsehood. But that's fine. If that's what we're trying to figure out, what people react to, I understand that.
The last forced choice question here is, this uses some of the rhetorical language I think that maybe I just referenced a few minutes ago. Two statements read in random order. Which one do you agree with more, closer to your opinion? Basically that this Measure O has been a problem, the city's made a mistake, and before addressing anything else, we really need to address this formula. And the other statement is, we shouldn't let addressing some of these issues with Measure O get in the way of considering other revenue measures. And looking at those two statements, there was not unanimity here, but 49%, essentially half, said let's press on and not let the debate around Measure O stand in the way of considering other measures. And about a third said no, hey, pump the brakes. We really want to focus on dealing with Measure O prior to focusing on any other revenue measures. And then close to 1 in 5 at 18% had a hard time picking and choosing between those two options. The last little section here of actual hard numbers to show, I think, may get at Councilmember Combs, one of your things you were bringing up, which was some of the other finance measures that we considered. And we admittedly did this in a very brief manner. We didn't have the space to thoroughly test. We've already tested 4. This would have been 7 different measures here, but we want to at least get look at our fingers, stick it up and see which way the wind is blowing on a couple of these items. So we did some conceptual statements on 3 different measures: a medical marijuana tax, a housing bond, and a modernization of the city's UUT. And you'll see that those total yes votes and total no votes are summarized here in the right-hand column. The first measure and the third measure, my understanding is, are majority vote measures. The housing bond obviously is a 2/3 measure. So looking here, and these are sorted in sort of ranked order of total support, you see that the marijuana measure has fairly robust support and relatively intense support at 38%, definitely yes. So 14 points above its vote threshold. The housing bond, again, has pretty strong support at 60%, but has that 2/3 vote threshold, so it's falling a little bit short of that. The UT looks kind of similar to where it was when we tested it back in many years ago, and when we recommended pursuing Measure P instead. It kind of soft majority support for it. It's a confusing concept, and A number of voters probably remember the measure that was on the ballot just a couple of years ago too, and so that may be lingering as well. So majority support for all these concepts, but the vote thresholds and the intensity make for a different sort of viability for each of them right now. I have a few concluding slides, and then Catherine is going to speak to some of the strategic implications of what this long presentation has been. So, big picture, thinking about the city, people like living here. They like it more than they did 9 years ago. The perception, the right direction around track numbers are up, so generally more positive. The departments are viewed very favorably, at least the big ones we asked about. City government overall, majority views city government favorably and view the provision of city services favorably. A little more mixed opinion about financial management, but there aren't people really up in arms over it. It's just maybe a little less enthusiastic. At the same time, voters feel like the city needs more money. A pretty solid majority feel like the city needs more money to address the range of services that they want to see provided. Issues that related to housing and homelessness are definitely at the top of the list. I don't think there's any question in terms of concern levels about what voters are most concerned about. We've talked about some of the nuances there in terms of what their spending priorities are, but in terms of what is a top of mind issue, cost of housing is right at the top of the list. And perceptions about crime have been a little more mixed. Gang-related crime, people are very mixed on, and whether crime rates overall have increased, a few more people feel like that may be the case. When it comes to Measure P, there's solid majorities who indicated they support either one of those measures at the quarter-cent or half-cent. Over the course of the survey and after they'd heard pro and con argumentation, they felt similarly. Although there was pretty consistently stronger support at the quarter-cent level, which is not surprising. I think that's fairly intuitive and was borne out by the results here. And I think that we just need to the extent you're going to consider renewing Measure P, the main consideration here is the timing of that. Really, if you want to take advantage of the majority vote threshold, it needs to be either this November or November 2018.
If for some other reason there was a special election held, would you say that it would be inopportune or opportune to use that to add one of these items to a special election if it came up for another reason?
Yeah, well, I would say in terms of Measure P, it'd be very problematic because you'd be invoking a 2/3 vote threshold for Measure P if there was a special election that was held.
I don't mean specific for the measure, but
Oh.
if there happened to be a special election for some other reason, would it be appropriate to put one of these items on?
We will address the sequencing, our recommended sequencing of the measures in just a moment.
I think I may understand a little bit more about the question. And so I think the question is, if for some reason a special election was called, would there be any issue, and again, it can be in the sequencing conversation, if a special election were called, would there be any issues with placing one of the other measures on the special election call? So if for some reason the city had a special election in the intermeeting times, would that impact the items? A couple of them are 50% thresholds. One of them is a 2/3 threshold. So I think it's a combination of a little bit of a combination of questions. But what would be the impact? And I don't know if we have the answer to that question right now. But I think that's what I'm hearing the question to be.
We would encourage the city to look at all election scenarios available, including special elections. Obviously, notwithstanding my comments earlier, the surveys being reviewed today did more closely examine a high turnout election scenario. And as an abundance of caution and prudence, we would counsel the city to look specifically at evaluating viability within a special election environment.
Yeah, and we have the ability to look back at the results by all the respondents to the survey are voters who have voting histories, and that's how we build our models, which elections they voted in. And so we can look at a lower turnout election and analyze the results by that if it comes up. Yeah. When it comes to Measure O, I think the big takeaways from our point of view here is that it's not a deeply familiar issue. Not that many voters, 12%, said they're very familiar with the issue. So it's clearly not necessarily a top of mind. But once we spent time, admittedly in a limited fashion, trying to introduce some of the concerns about the funding formula, it really, voters were incredibly evenly divided on whether or not to reform the measure or not, in terms of the minimum spending levels. I think we could probably have a more robust conversation about this momentarily. And let me see here. Okay, this is my last slide here. On the other finance measures we just discussed, while we have majority support for all of them, the vote thresholds make a big difference. So the marijuana measure looks like by far the most viable of those alternatives. We've seen those pass in other communities with fairly robust levels as well, depending upon other circumstances. A bond measure for housing seems like clearly it's a top of mind issue. It seems that there may be an opportunity for more community dialogue about it, though, compared to some of the other things they're concerned about. But you have a strong majority who would still support it. UT measure seems maybe a little more tricky given the recent history of the city and the fact that those are always less intuitive to understand. It take more engagement for voters to really comprehend what's going on when you're modernizing a measure like that to reflect modern telecommunication technologies. And then I'm going to pass this over to Catherine.
Thank you, Kurt. We do have some strategic recommendations for the City Council to consider. And before I launch into those, just to state some of the opinions that our team expressed at the Long-Term Fiscal Stability Committee. So when we look at the possible action steps available to the city, we look at the number of elections and the timing available to you. So obviously, the Measure P issue, as Kurt has described, may only be placed on the ballot during a regularly scheduled municipal election, thereby limiting the timing options available to the city. We also look to viability. In other words, we presume that anyone considering placing a measure or measures on the ballot wishes to understand and in many cases seeks a viable measure. So with that in mind, we consider the fact that a general purpose measure, the Measure P renewal, can only be placed on the ballot during a November even year cycle. Therefore, it seems rather straightforward to indicate that the city should definitely consider doing so in November of this year. Measure O, on the other hand, can be addressed during any election cycle or calendar year. In other words, the city is not limited from the standpoint of timing and its placement of the measure. The same is also true of a housing bond. So in other words, you do have the 17 calendar year available for Measure O revisions, while you do not have that option available for Measure P renewal. November 2018 can also be used, as Kurt mentioned, for either UUT, housing bond, or other marijuana-related, business license tax-related issue. The other thing that I will say that we considered is, as the council has noted, you see some volatility in the Measure P results. So there is a clear preference. Renewal at the quarter cent is straightforward. Renewal at the half-cent rate may be less so when considering what else in the environment may affect consideration or the viability of that measure. It certainly got my attention that the city still has somewhat of a mixed perception from its constituents on fiscal management and other issues. Should those particular issues be debated vociferously during the period in which a Measure P renewal is also on the ballot? It is certainly a riskier path to pursue the half-cent renewal. Measure P considerations. Our team is very comfortable recommending a Measure P renewal at the half-cent rate this year, provided that the following criteria are met. No other city measures on the ballot at the same time. In our experience, we do find that voters do pick and choose. Also bear in mind that there could very well be as many as 18 measures on the ballot before your local measures, and becomes an alphabet soup, a mush of different measures. To the judgment of the city and its stakeholders, we do recommend that should you choose to proceed with a Measure O revision, that continued collaboration and teamwork continue in a manner that does not exacerbate constituent debate or concerns about the city's fiscal management. Again, I must underscore that the rate at which you choose to renew Measure P is also tied to the communications environment at the time that the measure is on the ballot. We would recommend that a marijuana initiative, should you decide to proceed with doing so in 16, be a companion measure to the Measure P renewal only if you maintain Measure P at the current rate. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation, and we are available to answer questions.
Council, questions before I move to public comment? Okay, Ann Seeley, followed by Terry Price.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I think this is a very useful examination of what is possible. I have to say that as I speak to people in the community about the Measure P, Measure O matter, there's consternation on the part of the public to think that the city might not get Measure O's house in order before considering Measure P renewal. That it is, we need to balance everything before we ask people to continue to pay money. That said, I just want to comment on the consultants mentioning that there's some concern on the part of the public about the city's financial stability and management of money. And that's another reason I think that if Measure O reform is not on the ballot in this November, that there's going to be reasonable questioning about how the city considers that you are being responsible. So I hope that I urge you to put Measure O reform on the ballot this November. If you want to put Measure P on also, you can connect in your language in the ballot argument, perhaps the fact that you are cleaning up your act with regard to Measure O, and ask the voters to support Measure P. The one consultant mentioned that the voters aren't necessarily savvy about what Measure O says literally, but they certainly see the effects of an increase in public safety's percentage of the city's budget. So that, I think, is kind of a specious argument. please do put a reform of Measure O on the ballot. I think it's important for the city's credibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry Price, and Terry will be followed by Steve Bertlebaugh.
Mayor, City Council, I'm glad this particular slide was left up on the screen. The second bullet, this particularly tortured sentence, which I guess would mean that we better all be on board and not inflame the public about any of the city's financial management issues. I think it would be fair to say that this is going to be a very difficult measure to pass, no matter how it's worded. I think you need a 7-0 vote from the City Council to reassure the public that they are doing the right thing with their vote. And I think that you would also have to look at the history of the measures that have come recently, especially Measure A, the transportation measure, which was a slam dunk measure in the 60 percentile. And the amount of money that was spent on that measure equated to a big fat zero. It was all defeated with letters to the editor. And the primary reason for that was a distrust of the governing body that was going to manage those funds. The people that I'm talking to say to not address Measure O when you're trying to renew Measure P is a non-starter. It's not no, it's hell no. And it's been recognized, and this is not just by me, but by many others, including the Press Democrat, if you happen to read the editorial today, which states that very clearly there's a different feeling in the public than there was during the recession in 2010. And that there's going to be a major scrutiny of why we need to renew this particular ballot measure, Measure P, when we have a recognized systemic defect in our budgeting process for the city. And that can be fixed. There can be a remedy, which the long-term Finance Committee has recommended. There is a fix for it. So when I was brought in by Mayor Gorin in 2010, along with Herb Williams and Jane Bender and Janet Condren, to look at the financial situation of the city at that point, it was dire. It was desperate. Layoffs, services shut down. We're in a big fix. And at that time, the city, the citizens said, we'll trust you to spend that money any way you want. 50% vote, any way you want. That was then. This is now. Unless you have this teamwork, which means 100% support across the board from police, fire, city council, your conservatives, and your liberals, this measure is not going to get passed unless you connect P and O.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Steve Bertlebaugh.
Thank you, Mayor Sawyer and members. I'm puzzled by the strength of support for housing and the 60% result when you talk about services and programs that will improve housing for a bond. I think that the problem that the public feels right now most strongly, that most justifies any measure of a fiscal nature, is to actually deal with the housing issue. And that you would enhance whatever you do if you go ahead and do that this November.
Thank you, Mr. Bertlebaugh. Council, those are all the cards that I have. Any questions? It's a lot of information, a lot of things to consider. Ms. Combs?
I guess I think slide 46 pretty clearly shows a tale of two cities there. That's the 46 slide. That's interesting to me. We've seen the two cities result in other areas. So is this overall a snapshot, a point in time? Is that what a poll is?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. If there were a negative campaign, would that affect these results? Does your chart with the lines going up and down after education, et cetera, is that a pretty clear indicator of what would happen after a negative campaign? Is that a reasonable predictor?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's really hard to predict how things will take place over the course of a number of months. And in this particular circumstance, we modeled that there would be some sort of explanation about what is going on, and arguments in favor of a measure would potentially come first, and then critical statements would come second. So if the dynamic was flipped, if there were no community groundswell and support for a measure, and was only criticisms or for either measure, then the dynamic might be a little bit different.
Following up on one of our commenters, I noted that the county measure A failed. It had a survey that showed a fairly strong level of support. I think it was 60% or so, I'm remembering. And it also, if I recall, had the support of all 5 supervisors. And yet that measure failed. How do we, knowing that happened in our county, along with the library and the UUT tax, should that information color or inform our looking at these results?
Well, our team was not involved in the Measure A campaign. As I mentioned when we initiated the workshop, I think the survey results are one of several touchstones, if you will, for the City Council to use in its deliberations. One of the things that I want to say about this slide and these results, which are not unique to the City of Santa Rosa, but just how we read these surveys, is I look to the last ballot test, the final ballot evaluation of the 75 words by the end of the survey. And something that's notable to me is that this percentage is within, not above, the margin of error. Not unique to the City of Santa Rosa or this issue.
I'm sorry, would you say that again? You said
Not
it was
unique to the City of Santa Rosa.
I mean, within the margin of error?
You are within the margin of error. So the margin of error, the 54% on the last ballot test of the Measure O reform measure is not above the margin of error. It is within the margin of error. And as an advisor to a multiplicity of public agencies, it bears noting that we will typically only, on the presumption that an agency is only considering a measure that wishes to be viable, we will only recommend that an agency proceed with placing a measure on the ballot if it is solidly above the margin of error, not within it.
And the next slide, I think, is it the one before or after this one? Was this the non-reform, is that one within the margin of error?
Yes, this was for the continuation measure, and it was a conceptual ballot test of a 2/3 requirement measure, which this conceptual ballot test does not meet during this period of time.
Okay. You mentioned that there were 18 measures likely to be on the ballot in competition.
Well, the statutory deadline is August 12th, so we don't know.
Could be more.
Yes. I would not necessarily characterize all of them as being in competition, as several of them are state propositions that may not be asking for money. But it is an interesting environment in that, on the one hand, the city enjoys will enjoy the strong participation of newer voters, younger voters, other demographics who very seriously consider these types of measures and tend to be supportive of them. And one must balance that against the volume of alphabet letters that precede yours. And of course, any polarizing debate at the local level on the policy measures contemplated. So it is true that within this period of time, in general, again, not unique to the city of Santa Rosa, we are seeing a potentially polarizing presidential environment, and an environment in which constituents and voters look to the unity and teamwork of their elected officials and others. And so to the extent that that teamwork or consensus may not exist, it will affect their views on any local measures presented.
And I think that was a lot of the topic of conversation at the Long-Term Finance Committee was the issue will be on viability a lot around consensus. I would say on the Measure A conversation, I recollect that conversation took a long time to get to consensus, and there was a lot of concern before that consensus, if I remember that, especially from this body, about the division. And I think that was one of the questions that really started to inform that conversation, where it was apparently a general tax, but there were plans being drawn up to make it implemented as a more specific measure, which at its heart started to challenge the viability of something. If you're in those types of conversations, whatever the polling comes back, questions started to arise. Well, why aren't you pursuing a specific tax if there's a specific approach going to be at the end of it? I don't question strategy. I just recollect that was often the conversation about that. And I think the conversation on Monday, or it would have been a week ago Monday, the Long-Term Finance Committee really was focused, and the advice was, there's room here, but the room is going to be predicated upon consensus. As we drift further and further for consensus, the challenges only get more and more difficult. What staff is going to be looking for is sort of conceptually where council is about the next step, which is, and I'll just set that out, on July 19th, we're going to come back with some ordinances for consideration for a proposal of those ordinances on July 26th. So that's the schedule that lays out. So there's time for input and conversation between now and then, but we really, beyond the questions about the survey itself, we do also need some guidance around expectation from council members about what their expectation they'd like to see on the 19th looks like.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. My last question, Mayor, is will we hear today any information from the subcommittee that had a conversation about this?
I would defer to the two subcommittee members who are here.
You know, I'll speak for myself. After hearing all of the information, I was, and continue to be, in a quandary in how to move forward. There is information in this survey that can support a number of directions. It would have been nice had the numbers been so clear and to indicate so vividly how we should move forward. That would have been a great convenience, and it speaks to the on the Measure O piece. In some ways, it's been now 12 years. No, I'll take back 14 years since the measure was put into place, and people have forgotten, in a sense. They have enjoyed the results of Measure O, and they have enjoyed and pleased that the community voted for it, and they have benefited from it, but their knowledge about it is less than it was when the measure was first debated. And that is it's something that's going to last 20 years. That's to be expected. But now when we bring up the conversation and look at making some adjustments to the language, that makes that job difficult. Especially when in the press they are suggesting that there is a need, and the community is not as convinced, at least in the polling. It all depends on who you ask, and where you stand depends on where you sit. And there are some of the community that are very, very clear about the need, and there are others that don't understand actually how the measure works. We have benefited from both Measure O and Measure P, and I wish that we had the ability to very clearly, concisely move in one direction or another. And I was left after our meeting when we first heard these numbers. I was troubled by my lack of clear direction and obvious direction in how to move forward. And there was frustration by the consultants. They're about clear direction, and it was frustrating for it's frustrating for the consultants, it's frustrating for the council to have that absolutely clear direction. And so we are challenged by that. And what I would be asking for today is if there is anything that the council needs in helping them in the next days and before we come forward with a final decision in moving forward with one of these or with a number of options. Is there anything that could help you make a decision, or to help in your pondering of these options, bringing us to the 19th? Is it the 19th?
So there's a direction item scheduled for July 19th, and then there is the actual first reading of those items that were directed on the 19th on the 26th, with the second reading scheduled for the 2nd of August.
So is there, for me, I would have a hard time this evening making a firm recommendation from my seat on the subcommittee. Mr. Wysocki is out of town today. I will we'll wait for his comments, when he returns from his vacation. Mr. Corsi, anything you'd like to add about the conversations in our subcommittee meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important for us all to take a step back and remember why we're having this conversation in the first place, and why this came out of the Long-Term Financial Policy Subcommittee. We've all seen the long-term budget spreadsheet, and we've all seen that it turns red very quickly in about 2 years from now, when Measure P expires. Measure P has been a huge help to the community, and as Mr. Price said, it came at a desperate time, and it saved a lot of good things that the city does. We've been able to do those things over the past few years, and we're doing more now. The economy is better, but the economy is not back. The city budget is not completely back. We're still in a tentative place. And while we've had some extra one-time money that we've been able to put into housing and roads and the kind of things that have really suffered over the past few years, that is one-time money. It's not going to be there next year. It's not going to be there the next year after that. And down the road, if we don't have Measure P, we're going to be in real trouble. So that's why we're talking about this in the first place, and we need to focus on that aspect, that we need to renew Measure P, or we're going to be spending. If we don't renew Measure P this fall, we're going to be spending the next 2 years planning for that fiscal cliff that we've all been seeing on the long-term plan. The reason that Measure O comes into this is because what happened during those lean years when the budget was cut for most of the city, the Measure O baseline continued to grow. The council in 2013 recognized that. The council in 2014 recognized that and decided that the time wasn't right. I don't think that we can do that now. It was stated that Measure O is not a top-of-mind issue, and clearly the polling shows that it's not. But I guarantee you that if we put Measure P on the ballot without having Measure O on the ballot, that Measure O will become a top-of-mind issue right there with Measure P. Because every time Measure P is talked about in the next 4 or 5 months, Measure O will be talked about also. The recommendation of the Long-Term Financial Policy Committee was to put both of these issues on the ballot. Was to, actually, I don't think we recommended on Measure P. I think that we probably would recommend on Measure P. We recommended that Measure O be moved forward with a reform that creates a baseline that's tied to a percentage, a proportion of the general fund. It's a fair recommendation. It was a compromise, I think, between the three of us. Some people wanted less, some people wanted more. It was acknowledged by the police chief and the fire chief that the budget proportion that those two departments received of the general fund last year was adequate for their purposes. That this will allow that budget to increase when times are good. It will, the baseline will be reduced when times are bad, like all other budgets of the city. The city council retains the ability to adjust it as it deems necessary. So it's, the polling is not, it's not pointing us in a strong direction on Measure O. I think that the community is pointing us in a strong direction. I think this council and past councils have pointed us in that direction, and I think we would be making a mistake if we didn't follow that direction and put both of these on the ballot.
Thank you. Other questions, council, on the polling results?
Mayor and council, if
Please.
I might, before we depart, only as I did not emphasize this point earlier, our strategic recommendations were based on a presumption, based on our review of the discussion in the public arena on the issue of Measure O. I would like to state clearly that we could foresee that Measure P would continue to be viable while on the ballot with Measure O if there was a consensus measure on Measure O. In other words, there would be full consensus on both measures, and under those circumstances, we would not foresee Measure P's viability being affected.
Unanimity on the council.
Correct. And how we have advised our client, a simple majority is not unanimity. We have advised our clients that a united vote is the ideal outcome.
Thank you. It's an important clarification. Ms. Combs.
I just want to make a summing up comment. I recall that as a council, there was a vote to support the recommendation of the subcommittee. And so I would be remiss in not saying that I also support the prior recommendation that we've already voted on coming out of the subcommittee, and that I would like to see Measure O and Measure P move forward together. simply to ensure that we don't have the divisive conversation that could come forward if we didn't have them moving forward together. So I'd like to strongly support the recommendation coming out of the subcommittee. And just as an aside comment, I thought we'd done more on the housing bond, but we haven't. I strongly support the concept of a housing bond coming forward in the future. I would not want it to interfere with the proper movement forward for Measure P and Measure O together. You know, we don't want to lose those streetlights. We don't want to lose the city services that we've just reinstituted. We need to keep P and O together in order to keep those services moving in the right direction. But I also think that at some point in the future, we're going to need to address the #1 concern of our citizens and the top priority of our council, and to move forward with a housing bond at some point in the future. And at some time, I'd like us to do the work we need to do in order to make that a reality.
Thank you. Just for clarification, too, to get the meetings in order, and some months ago, the long-term financial subcommittee met and decided to move forward with a recommendation, and that recommendation led to the polling that we are seeing this afternoon. And now the council will be charged with making a final decision on what will happen with that polling and what will appear on the ballot on the 19th. Thank you. We are in recess until 4 o'clock. Do we need to re-announce the roll, Madam City Clerk?
Let the record show that all council members are present, with the exception of Councilmember Carlstrom and Councilmember Wysocki.
Thank you, and that will remain so for the rest of the afternoon. The report on our study session. Mr. McGlynn.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. And in our closed session, we received various updates regarding our ongoing labor negotiations, and we are expecting in the not-too-distant future some recommendations for the council to act on. We have no presentations or proclamations this afternoon. We have no staff briefings. Mr. McGlynn, anything to report this afternoon?
If I can find the button, nothing to report.
All right, thank you. And Madam City Attorney?
Nothing here either, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Council, any statements of abstention this afternoon? Seeing none, moving on to reports. Any reports this afternoon? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Just a couple things. One, I had the opportunity to make a presentation on collaboration and the work with the Santa Rosa Violence Prevention Partnership at the Institute of Local Governments two-day class. I was just there on Friday, so it was really nice to share our stories about what we've done in regarding the partnerships and the power of collaboration. And then I was also able to attend the Univision's Health Fair on Saturday, along with our Community Engagement Director, and Santa Rosa Water was there with their hydration station, which was very well used because I think it was about 95 at 11 o'clock in the morning. But also the partnership was there, neighborhood revitalization program was there, in addition to the fire department. So, Mr. McGlynn, I really appreciate you giving that direction to have some city staff there for some of these prevention methods that are going on in the community. So it was really nice.
I wish I could take credit, but that shows you the crack team does things automatically.
Excellent, thank you. Any other reports? Ms. Combs.
I attended the Ham Radio Operators Field Day. This is a group of folks who ensure that we have communications in disasters. We didn't get to talk to the International Space Station when it went over, but we sure tried. So it was interesting. I have never seen quite so many radio, I'm trying to find the word other than nerd to use, but it was really cool. I mean, we had a good time. It was so much fun that when I told my husband about it, we went back again because he wanted to see it. So I recommend, this is an annual event, that folks check out the Ham Radio Field Day next time it comes by. I also had the wonderful opportunity to talk with staff about the recommendations that we'll be taking forward to ABAG for the scenarios conversation, and have received essentially a couple of sheets of comments from our planning staff to carry forward to the scenarios conversation. And we'll keep you updated as we move the ABAG scenarios program forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have two sets of minutes to approve this afternoon, May 31st and June 7th. Any corrections, Council? We can, yes, the 31st.
I don't know if they
would be
need to
first.
be separated just because we have an updated one that was in our packet.
Yes. So
I mentioned a correction to Stephanie. I don't know if it's already corrected or not.
Not on the
City
ones
Clerk.
that in your packet. There is a correction to the May 31st minutes that Councilmember Schwedhelm made me aware of, but I was unable to correct the ones that you have, but I will before they are finalized.
It's not a significant correction. It should say that I'm absent and doesn't say so.
okay, so that will be corrected. So we can move forward with the, we can separate them and move forward with the approval?
Yes, as they are amended.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will, so do you need a separate motion based on the correction of the May 31st? Or just, okay, so they'll be accepted as submitted and corrected, the minutes. Moving on to consent, Mr. McGlynn.
Item 12.1, ordinance adoption, ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa establishing salary and other compensation and benefits for the interim city attorney.
Council questions? I have one card on this item. Mr. Osborne.
Jack Osborne, 5636 Dale Almighty Court. I really didn't want to come down here today, but I'm getting upset. I know on this thing, the salary ordinance was set, but I happened to notice, and I talked to Callaware today, and there's apparently no such position in the city employees as an interim city attorney. It's not shown. So you must have created a new position. And you created the position without telling the people you created a position. And you don't think that's wrong. You think just because you call it interim, that's okay to do what you want. I don't think so. And I don't know why you think that you do these things, you create a position, you set the salary, and you discuss the salary for Molly in closed session. And I don't know why the human resources people would even recommend a salary for an interim city employee. It's not their job. It's your job for all the other people. City manager sets everybody up. But you do the rest of it, but you don't want to do it according to what I think the Brown Act is. Now, coincidentally, and this is really interesting to me, maybe not to you, I look down here and see 14.3, which I'm going to talk on also, where you want to appoint LLP. But then what do I find on the agenda? Conference with labor negotiators, agency designated representatives, Holtzman, John Holtzman of Rene Holtzloan, Holtzman Sakai LAP, in a closed session, and he's not appointed to be there. He's not an official city representative, and he's in closed session representing you people. Don't you see anything wrong with that? Have you ever had any full education on the Brown Act? I don't know. The whole thing smells, is the way I put it, smells. And I'll get more into that when I go on 14.3. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. And once again, we did not discuss the salary of Ms. Dillon. And you may, or you can state it as many times as you want, Mr. Osborne, but it does not make it the truth. Those are all the cards I have on consent. Ms. Dillon?
Well, and I would just, to respond in clarification, the interim just is, the position as city attorney, obviously interim implies that it's pending subsequent action by the council to recruit a permanent position. And I also want to point out that the firm name is the appointee and not the labor negotiator.
Thank you. Those are all the cards I have on consent. And Mr. Schwedhelm, you have this.
Thank you. I move consent item 12.1, waive further reading of the text.
Second. Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Your votes, please, council. And I have 5 ayes. Thank you very much. Moving on to report, Mr. McGlynn.
Item 14.1, report, City of Santa Rosa wastewater revenue refunding bonds, Series 2016A. Deborah Lochner, Chief Financial Officer, presenting.
Good afternoon. I just want to, I'll go through the slides in a minute to tell you what we're talking about. But I do want to let you know that the financing team is here. So we do have Chris Lynch from Jones Hall, who is our bond counsel. Next to me is Nick Jones from PFM, who does our financial advisor work and runs a lot of numbers for us. And then we also have Wing C. Fox here from the underwriter firm of Raymond James. So if there are questions that are in their area of expertise, they are here to help answer those questions as we move through the approval of this item.
Thank you.
So currently, our wastewater enterprise has about $250 million of outstanding debt. In 2007, we issued $61 million to fund some wastewater projects, and we refunded issuances from 1996, 1998, 2001, and 2004. In 2008, we issued another almost $49 million, which for wastewater projects as well, and those are the 2008 bonds. In addition to that, we have state loans totaling $55 million, and we've been borrowing money on the state loans since the year 2000. We are proposing to refund all of the 2008 bonds and a portion of the 2007 bonds and a portion of the state loans, depending on how they pan out at the time we actually price the transaction. So overall, we need to see a savings of 3% in order for those issuances to be refunded under this program. We are expecting an overall net present value savings of over $12 million, and this is frees up some of those net revenues for additional capital projects. And it does save our sub-regional partners money as well, because they pay into these debt services, and they will be saving money as well. So overall, the recommendation is that the council by resolution approve the debt issuance along with all those documents that are necessary in order to issue the debt, in order to redeem the, refinance the debt, as I mentioned before, and that's what we're here to discuss.
Excellent. Thanks for the presentation. Council, questions? Mr. Corsi?
Thank you. Why are you refunding only portions of some of these? Are they at different rates? Is that?
The bonds are, the 2007 bonds you're referring to, which we're only going to refund a portion of, were originally issued for multiple purposes. One of the purposes was to advance refund prior debt. Under federal tax law, municipal bonds can only, tax-exempt municipal bonds can only advance refund one series. So the portion that has already performed advance refunding cannot be advance refunded. Only the portion that was used for new money projects. However, we are anticipating that that portion, which we're leaving outstanding under this issuance, will be refunded under a future planned issuance, perhaps next year, once it becomes currently callable.
Okay, the restrictions on the bonds are the cause that you're only doing some.
That's correct.
Okay. And the savings of more than $12 million over what period of time?
The structure sort of varies, but the savings last all the way through the end of fiscal year 2038.
Okay. And what are the costs of this refunding?
The costs, the upfront costs include cost of issuance fees, which, financial advisory fees, legal fees, and then there's fees for issuing bonds. The underwriter will charge. Now, those fees are netted out of the savings number we presented, so that's...
Is that before the 12 million or after?
That's before the 12 million. So the 12 million has already netted out those fees, so it's a net present value number, and we're estimating the total fees will be in the $550,000 range.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I saw that the BPU is recommending it, but I didn't see, when did the BPU discuss this and what was their vote?
So the BPU met, I believe it was June 16th, and it was a unanimous vote to recommend it to the council.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, council? I have no cards on this item. Mr. Schwedhelm, you have this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa authorizing the issuance of City of Santa Rosa wastewater revenue refunding bonds, Series 2016A, approving and authorizing and directing execution of supplemental indenture of trust relating thereto, authorizing sale of such bonds, approving official statement, and authorizing official action and waive further reading.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Your votes, council. And we have 5 ayes. Thank you very much. Mr. McGlynn, 14.2.
Item 14.2, report collaborative memorandum of understanding between the City of Santa Rosa and the Santa Rosa City School District to achieve low and/or moderate income housing for school district employees on Fir Ridge Drive, Lot F, APN 173-620-030. Joey Henowitz, City Manager Fellow, presenting.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. Obviously, my name is Joey Henowitz. I'm here representing the City Manager's Office, and I have with me Steve Eichman, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Santa Rosa City Schools, and we are here to present to you the Memorandum of Understanding for the Fir Ridge Drive project that you're going to soon find out about if you don't already know so.
Thank you.
Okay, so the issue at hand is whether or not the council should approve the Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Rosa and the Santa Rosa City School District, which would be extending the 12th Amendment milestones to the holding agreement for an additional 3 years, and also to memorialize the partnership between the city and the school district in the hopes of achieving this lower moderate income housing on the Fir Ridge Drive, which is Lot F, which you'll see here soon in a map. So this does achieve council goal number 5, which is to approve partnerships between neighborhoods, community organizations, schools, and the city to support and promote thriving, inclusive, and diverse neighborhoods. And it does also achieve the Housing for All council priority concept. Okay, so this is the map of the Fir Ridge Drive housing site. Lot F, you'll see there in black. It is off right next to a park right there in green, so it kind of gives you an idea of where it's at there off of Fountain Grove Parkway. So a little bit of background on the holding agreement. This was originally approved by council April 26, 1988, when the Fir Ridge North at Fountain Grove subdivision was approved as a dedication for a 7-acre site. It was either supposed to be either an elementary school originally and or lower moderate income housing. So there was a 4-year negotiation period for the school district to purchase a site from the developer, which was Braywood Corporation, or the city was to dedicate the site to the school district. At this point, there was a 10-year timeline for the school district to begin construction of the school, or the site would revert back to the city. And then at that point, if that was to happen, there was going to be an additional 5-year timeline for the city to enter into an agreement for the construction of affordable housing on this on Fir Ridge. If this timeline did expire, the developer, which was aforementioned as Braywood Corporation, would have the right to recover the title with no further obligations or dedications on this site. So the following is a timeline of the holding agreement amendments approved by the council and other events from 1992 to the present time. So I'll just run through these real quickly. There have been, as you can see, a number of amendments over the years, and these plans have been amended to require additional time to develop a plan of action and implementation for the school district due to things such as the Great Recession, a recovering economy, changes in the school district leadership, and also the possibility of increased financial resources for the school district that they were looking into. So I'll just give you a chance to peruse amendment number 4 with some further extensions. Okay, so now we see amendment number 5 in 2005, amendment number 6 in 2006, which is basically just continuous extensions and land use approvals for the construction to begin on the affordable housing for the site there. Okay, so continuing with additional amendments, amendment number 7 in 2007, number 8 in 2008, and amendment number 9 in 2009. Amendment number 10, 2011, and then amendment number 11 in 2013, continuing to extend land use approvals and the beginning of construction of affordable housing on the Fir Ridge Drive site. So then we get to amendment number 12 in 2015, which is actually the amendment in question with the MOU for the extension. And this was a 2-year extension to June 30th, 2017, to obtain the land use approvals and begin construction of the affordable housing. At this point, there were some milestones that were initiated by council, kind of good faith milestones that were given to the school district, and I'll tell you about those shortly. So the 12th Amendment milestones, which we are asking you to extend for additional 3 years, and the 12th Amendment was originally to apply through the Community Development Department, which has changed subsequently, but for a 12-month extension of the project, no later than November 9th, 2005, and they did do so. Which is why we're here in front of you today is number 2 there, which is no later than June 30th, 2016, is to enter into a fully executed contract with the developer and have a funding project in place for the construction of the project. And then lastly, submit applications of the city's Community Development Department for further extension of project approvals on or before November 9th of 2016. And then, as mentioned, no later than June 30th, 2017, to commence the construction of the project, which would mean the issuance of building permits for the project and a construction timeline. Okay, so the current situation is that the city and the school district wish to work in partnership towards the goal of providing for sale or rental housing for the school district for employees of low and or moderate income on Fur Ridge Drive. The school district does not and will not have both a fully executed contract in place with the developer and a funding plan prior to June 30th, 2016, which is required under the 12th Amendment, which is why I'm here before you today. But since June 30th, 2015, since the 12th Amendment, the school district has made significant good faith efforts to make this project a reality, and I will let Steve discuss those good faith efforts.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for providing me the opportunity to discuss this with you this afternoon. In the past year, as Mr. Henowitz says, we've made quite a bit of progress. We've hired a cultural resource study to be commissioned, and that has been done. They found a couple of, or several, what they believe are hunting blinds on the project or on the site, but nothing of cultural significance. But they also had vetted it through a couple of tribal organizations. They didn't find anything either that would prevent us from moving forward. The only request that they had is that as we do initial excavation, that they be allowed to be on site in case there is something that is uncovered during that initial excavation. We've also worked with city staff and Carlisle Macy, a landscape engineer, to update the engineering conditions, and we've retained the services of a civil engineer as well, the district has. We've also issued an RFP for developers that is due on July 5th. Once we have that, then we've ordered the contract. We'll solicit the services of bond counsel to secure appropriate financing. And then we've also been working closely with the city staff to ensure that the land use approvals previously received are all up to date and stay up to date. And also, I'd just like to thank the city manager's office, Mr. Henowitz, Nancy Gornowitz, and Aaron Morris for their help in meeting with us several times over the last year to keep this project moving forward, and always being willing to work with us to, like I said, keep the project moving forward. Thank you.
So the recommendation that we're asking the council approval on is to approve and execute the memorandum of understanding, which would extend all the milestones set forth in the 12th Amendment to the holding agreement for an additional 3 years to give the school district ample time to complete this project. The 3-year extension of the 12th Amendment has been incorporated into the resolution that you do have in front of you. So we are recommending that council approve this memorandum of understanding and also give light to the collaboration between the two entities. We also are asking that within the resolution you authorize the city manager the authority and the discretion to execute any further agreements to extend these milestones if the project is progressing substantially in the future, just so that we do not have to come back in front of council. We can just try to get all staff time towards getting this project a successful reality. And then lastly, and most importantly, is just memorializing the partnership between the city and the school district to work together towards the goal of providing for sale or rental housing for school district employees with lower moderate income on Fur Ridge Drive, which would be helping us achieve our Housing for All priority. And we are here to field any questions that you might have about this project.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. McGlynn. This has been, of course, before many councils over the years, over the last almost 30 years. Could you give me a sense of what substantial progress would look like, which would further extend the agreement?
So I think at the end of 3 years, we would be hopefully either in construction or in a position where we knew the date that construction would commence.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Council, other questions? Mr. Corsi, did you have a question? Okay, absolutely. We'll entertain comments.
Given the history of this, this has disappeared from the radar over the past 28 years, except for the fact that these extensions have had to come back to the council. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with not having it come back to the council if it needs to be extended again in 3 years. Nothing against your oversight of this, but I think that the council should retain that.
I
Other
have the
comments? Ms. Gomes?
motion. If I were to amend the motion to include that, how would I do that amendment?
I think you could just direct staff to make a modification in the agreement. The MOU's been drafted and approved by the school board. I just would want to check in with a representative from the school board to see if there would be any concerns on their part.
So if I make the motion and say, as directed or as amended, would that be sufficient?
Yes, I think that would be fine. We could, so long as it's a two-party agreement, I don't anticipate that there would be any problem on their side, but as long as they're fine with it, I think that would be acceptable.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. First, for the city manager, would be safe for me to assume that the reason that the amended one goes to the city manager to have the authority and discretion to act on behalf of the city council, the intent is it'd be a more efficient way to actually get this project completed?
That is the intent. It is not meant to take council out of the conversation, and there will be pending updates, but I'm comfortable with whichever way council is comfortable.
Thank you. Then for Mr. Eichmann, regarding the school board, what is the agreement? Does the school superintendent have the same authority that was at least on this draft? I recognize that may change, but can you let me understand how it's going to work on the school side?
Well, if it is passed this evening as amended, what I would do is take it back to the school board on our July 27th meeting and ask for them to approve it as amended. But I don't anticipate that there would be any problem with that.
So my question is what I heard from the city manager. The reason this is being recommended, having the city manager have the authority, is maybe a more efficient, effective way of basically getting this project done. Conversely, on the school board, they still have to go to the school board versus the superintendent and the city manager within the parameters given by each elected body, get it done. It seems kind of counterintuitive. Well, if the city's going to do it this way, why wouldn't the school board do it the same way?
Well, no, we would be doing it the same way. The superintendent would have the authority to authorize me to keep moving forward on this.
Without having to go to the school board?
Right, I think what the assistant superintendent is indicating is that because the school board already took action on the memorandum of understanding that's in front of us, that he would have to take it back for any modification to the agreement at this point. But that the provision in the MOU would allow the superintendent to continue to proceed with the project. So.
Thank you.
Other questions, council? And I have no cards on this item or comments, so we have a motion.
I have to make the motion, I think.
You do, you have the item.
But I do have a comment, and part of the reason why I would amend the motion is because I think 2 years ago or so, we were assured at how serious people were and how this was moving forward rapidly. So I'm a little reluctant I want to really understand that we're talking about breaking ground this time.
Well, and again, I want to caution, there wasn't 2 years ago. It was
Well-
it was a year ago that we were in a conversation of extension. And what was coming up in those conversations, it was a rolling extension without frankly, a target. Again, whatever the council's comfortable with, but this, I would say, the reason we're bringing forward this conversation is that those things are significant first steps in this conversation. And they've issued an RFP to bring back a deliverable for desperately needed housing within the community to support teachers, especially teachers coming into this environment, which we all know is a real issue on recruitment and retention.
We have no doubt that this is greatly needed for our teachers, for our employees of the school system. Absolutely no doubt about that. We used to have joint meetings with the school board and the council. And if we're entering into a partnership relationship, I would very much like to see that we return to having at some point a joint meeting where we talk about what our shared concerns are. We have shared concerns regarding transportation and buses. We have shared concerns regarding housing for employees. I'm hesitant to skip the opportunity to have a conversation with the school board because we have stopped having those regular joint meetings.
Well, that would fall within the council's prerogative to schedule that, if that's the instruction or advice you want to give the mayor, I'm more than happy to work on that issue. It's not, staff is working together. I think that's an open conversation.
This is one of the ways we talk to the school board again.
Can I assume that conversation is not, or that this moving forward this evening is not conditional on that conversation? Thank you. I'll take that as a yes. It is not conditional.
And I want to make one more comment. I should have said this before. I'm really happy to have this in front of us. I'm pleased as punch that you've actually got an RFP out and all this other thing, all these other elements of the project are going on. The extension that I would hope and expect that there wouldn't be a need for an extension in 3 years. And I don't think that not having it, giving the city manager the control over this is a way of causing any inefficiencies. I would actually like to see the efficiencies done before 3 years happen. So the only thing that we would be doing in 3 years is extending this, not holding it up. So I'm looking forward to it being done before then. Thanks.
So what I would need at this point, because
Shall I read the motion?
Well, unless you want to, what I want to do is find out the comfort level of the council as far as moving forward with the original motion as opposed to the amended one, because otherwise we could end up with a no vote on this and have to change it again and maybe hand it to another council member. So council,
I'm happy to read it either way.
Are you comfortable with Mr. Corsi? Are you comfortable with moving forward with the motion as written? No. Okay.
Mr. Oliveris. I mean, it sounds like we found a more efficient way of moving this forward. I mean, we do have packed agenda items, and we will have packed agenda items moving to the future. And I think I've heard this, I can't tell you how many times since 2008. And again, it's just a matter of formality that, okay, we're going to extend it. Let's just get it done and have the two administrators work it out and move it forward. I assume eventually a project may be coming to us to be looking at, but as far as this process, I don't have a need to keep looking at it every time we need an extension.
I would agree with that, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Again, my preference is the way as written, but I want to support this project because I think this is a great thing moving forward. So however we have to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to withdraw my suggestion here, but I'd just like to point out that, in the past, it was just extending it and moving it along. The last time it was before us, we put some conditions on it. That was done by the council, and that apparently has produced some action. I'm glad to see that and look forward to it, as I said before. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Combs?
That said, a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving a memorandum of understanding between the City of Santa Rosa and the City of Santa Rosa, the Santa Rosa City School District to achieve low and or moderate income housing on the Fir Ridge Drive, Lot F, APN 173-620-030, and authorizing a 3-year extension to all the milestones set forth in the 12th Amendment to the holding agreement, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Thank you. And your votes, council?
And get it done.
And I have 5 ayes. Thank you very much. Mr. McGlynn, 14.3.
Item 14.3, report. Appointment of interim city attorney and establishment of compensation. Rhonda McKinnon, presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Oh, there we are. Can you see this? I can see it, you can't, but we're working on it. Where's my? You have to put it on slide. Oh, there we go. So today we're talking about 3 separate items. Excuse me, that's the wrong one. It's not my issue. Pardon me.
You have a different issue at hand.
We're bringing it back.
The last few.
We just did that one.
It just feels like 3 years.
We need to revisit this a 19th time.
It's nice to have a handler. Okay. There it is. So the background, the city, we negotiated a PSA, professional services agreement for the city attorney services with Rennie Sloan, Holtzman, and Sakai. Teresa Stricker is here and has been the designated interim city attorney starting July 1st at a rate of $2.95 per hour. The agreement also provides for an assessment of the existing city attorney office to include recommendations on future operations and improvements, as well as guidance on the recruitment process. And Louise Rennie is here representing that part of the project. So it is a recommendation of the city that the council by resolution appoint the law firm of Rennie Sloan Holtzman Sakai to the office of interim city attorney and approve the professional service agreement with Rennie Sloan Holtzman Sakai. It's also recommended that the council by ordinance establish the compensation for the interim city attorney.
Thank you. Council, questions before I move to public comment? Seeing none, Mr. Osborne.
Jack Osborne, 5636 Dell, Monte Court. Okay, personal service agreement. Was it sent out for bid? No. Not sent out for bid? Don't you normally require contracts to be handled that way? Just a contract. All contract discussion is supposed to be in public. Why was it in under closed session? Contract agreement is dated at the bottom 815. The senator was appointed July 1st. How are you going to pay him? He wasn't appointed yet, but he's doing the services. And then you say it's an interim city attorney, but of course there's no such, he's not an employee. That's what it says in the agreement. It's not what I say. In the agreement, he says he is not an employee. So you can't do it in closed session, can you? 54957 or 576, you have to be employee. You are not appointing an employee of the city council. At least that's what the contract said. I didn't know that until I looked at the contract. It says right in there, we agree that the person is not an employee and not an employee, has no responsibility to the city. So why do you do this stuff? I might be the only guy in the city who gives a damn, and I appreciate that. But it is something that the citizens have to watch what the city does. Now, you say it's an interim thing. Okay, so you limit it to $200,000 a year. The city attorney only makes $235,000. So your intern employment, while you're doing recruiting, you're going to limit it to $200,000, and they're paying $595 an hour when necessary. Where do you come up with $595 an hour? Your attorney tell you? What do you think you should pay an attorney? This guy says, we'll do it for $595 an hour, or $145 an hour for a clerk. And you all just smile and say, oh, that's good, that's a good thing. And then you're going to pay all those additional expenses. For heaven's sakes, people. $200,000, and you do it without telling the people you're going to hire them, and then you hire them in July and don't tell anybody you hire. Thank you very much.
Ms. Dillon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, it is the city attorney position that's identified in the charter, and the Brown Act does allow for discussion of appointments of this position, so it's broad enough to cover a consultant in that position. And the position would start July 1st, and we already addressed the interim as just a placeholder.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and also, I believe Ms. McKenna could speak to this, but there were several proposals that were received and evaluated in this process.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind, I would like to introduce who we're talking about right now, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. So on the aisle, we have Louise Rennie. She's a partner in the firm, and she'll be the one that will be working on the assessment of the city attorney's office, the processes. And then next to her is Teresa, and she'll be starting July 1st, but she'll be our interim city attorney.
Welcome.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being here this afternoon. Council, any questions for staff or our interim city attorney firm? No questions? And I have no further cards on this item. And Mr. Oliveris, you have the item.
Thank you. I will start with a resolution. I'll move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa appointing an interim city attorney and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Your votes, Council. Madam City Clerk, could you reset there we go. And we have 5 ayes. Thank you very much. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. And I'll introduce an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa establishing salary and other compensation and benefits for the law firm of Renee Sloan Holtzman Sakai LLP as interim city attorney and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. And your votes? Thank you, Council. Passes. So moving to, we have no public hearings this afternoon, no written communications. I have to wait until 5 o'clock for public comment, so we will be in recess for 8 minutes. And back in session, we have a number of cards for our public comment period. Annie O'Malley, you were first, followed by David McMinn.
My name is Annie McLean O'Malley. I am a resident of Camp Michaela. A young man named Sirach was killed, I think, Sunday night. He was Eritrean, he was a poet, and he was homeless. Maybe if he'd been at Michaela, he wouldn't have been murdered. If I were outside of Michaela, I didn't know where I was going to go, although I was an advocate at Michaela before I became homeless. If I were living outside Michaela, I don't believe I'd be safe either. Sirach is dead. We need more places like Michaela. We need more done that comes after Michaela. At a Michaela, we're a cohesive, living entity. We work very hard to get along, to treat each other with kindness and respect. For some reason, for me, kindness is more than anything. And we're working very hard to keep ourselves going. This heat, I have a really nice tent, but you sure can't go in it. If I did, I would get sick. And we're trying to work with the Methodists to maybe get on their land where there's shade and maybe go further than that, maybe go to small, tiny houses. Somehow to give people who are human beings. They're human beings. And the people outside of Michaela that are homeless are also human beings, not people that just need to be moved here to get the heck out of the way for prettying things up or to make things more financially whatever. I'm not real good at all that stuff. All I care about is the homeless and people who need help, you know? I never expected to be homeless, never. I thought I have HUD. I don't have much else, but I have HUD. I'm poor. I've always been poor. As children, our family was poor. We had 6 kids and 1 mom. And okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. O'Malley. David McMinn, followed by Jack Osborne.
My name is David McMinn. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, council members, I first off just want to thank you very much for all the work that you have done with us.
Speak in the mic, if you're a little closer. There you go.
All the work that you've done for Camp Michaela. We appreciate this. We appreciate the county's help with what we're trying to do. And we thank the community for stepping up and helping us also. And there's a lot of people who are kind of fighting for us. And I know I deal with a lot of things in camp, but I hear a lot of rumors and a lot of miscommunication sometimes. And I personally wanted to come down here and let you know how things are going. I would like to actually meet with you all personally if I can, but things are actually going very well. I mean, the camaraderie and the hope and the things are all picking up in camp, and people are laughing now instead of wondering if they're going to be thrown out on here, because there is hope. And we keep fighting for our goals. And I know that there's if it wasn't for the rules and things that we have set forth, we'd probably have died a long time ago. We enforce them, and it doesn't matter who is the one there that has to go. If they have to go, they have to go because they're a problem. And we deal with every aspect of that, and we hold to those rules. And we want to work with our community, with our council members, with our county officials, with the sheriffs. There's been burglaries, there's been assaults, there's been heart attacks, there's been all kinds of things we've had to deal with in the last week. I'm actually helping the neighbors to help find somebody who broke into their building. We keep our eye out, we watch, we help. There's a lot of things that are crime-wise that are, it's what scares everybody out there to be on the street. I mean, because I hope they don't try to arrest me because I'm carrying a knife, I have to protect myself. I'm a senior citizen. I don't really go out on the streets too much. I stay in the camp and help do what I have to do to help those. And I see a lot of people who they're old and sick. They shouldn't even be there anyway. We're taking in people that's almost turning our camp into a convalescent hospital. But we do it anyway because we have to, where we're at maximum capacity. But there's still, people are coming together and working together and driving for a goal. And I just ask that you please don't give up on us. Just give us a chance and we'll work it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. McMahon. Jack Osborne, followed by Michael Vanderpoorten.
Jack Osborne, 5636 Del Monte Court. A little history for you. In 2001, I filed a complaint with the district attorney about your handling of unrepresented employees. Bruce Levitz responded to the district attorney and said what they did was they just joined them all together and considered them as a unit. And the assistant district attorney responded, Mr. Osborne is correct. If you're negotiating salaries for unrepresented employees, they must be identified individually by position on the agenda. But he says, if you have an employee representative organization that represents the employees with the management, then you don't have to do that. So what does the city do? City joined all the underrepresentatives into one organization and says we've done that and we're doing that. Now we can do it by just listening to the organization, unrepresented employees. And they told me, and since 2001, they've told me they have permission, granted permission by the district attorney's office to do that. And they quoted Mr. Holtzman's letter from the district attorney. Well, it turns out that the last paragraph of Mr. Holtzman's letter says, we cannot approve it. We cannot allow you to do that because that is not your mission. If you want an opinion of whether it's right or not, you have to ask the Attorney General. Well, they've never asked the Attorney General, but for 15 years, they've been telling me they've been approved by the district attorney's office. 15 years they've been lying to me. And you've seen me come up before you talk about unrepresented employees. And they've probably been telling you, and I don't know this, that they have approval from the district attorney's office. Well, I can tell you now that Mr. Holtzman's letter specifically denies that and says he cannot give you advice as to whether you're doing it correctly or wrongly. So ask the Attorney General. You've never done that. And you know how I feel about it when I feel that the city and the city attorney's office have been lying to me for 15 years, and I hope that's not accurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Michael Vanderpoorten, followed by Wayne Seaton.
Members of the council, My name is Mike Vonderpoort, and I live at On Manor Drive in West Santa Rosa. Last month, Chris Smith reported on a starfish story related to the current housing difficulties here in Santa Rosa and in our county. And the story goes that throwing a starfish back into the ocean doesn't do much for all the starfish, but it does help that one starfish. The problem with this story is that we don't have an ocean of housing. We have a small pond, one that's way too small to hold all the starfish. In this story, when you save a starfish, the ocean is so large that it has no impact on the ocean. It can absorb those starfish. The reality is, in our housing pond, when you save a starfish, the splash is so big that you throw 2 or 3 starfish out the other side. What the council's recent actions do is put government interference into which starfish are saved, and also these actions make this pond smaller. An apartment building with 100 units probably has about 250 residents today. There's a natural flow of people moving into bigger units, then trading into smaller units as the children grow up and move out. When mom decides to move nearer the kids, the 1-bedroom and studio apartments get freed up for new residents. Under rent control, the trading down and moving out is interrupted. An empty nester couple is better off keeping a 3-bedroom unit than trading down and moving into a 1-bedroom unit. The elderly mom, who is spending all her time, or nearly all her time, with her kids and grandkids in Pasadena, chooses to keep her low-cost unit in Santa Rosa, even though she's here for only a few weeks a year. Ultimately, the 250 units might shrink to what? 100 residents? This is how the council makes the pond smaller. This is how rent control reduces the carrying capacity of our rental units. This really is a pond problem. It's not a starfish problem. Assuring that a gold starfish gets thrown back in the pond only assures that there's no longer room for a brown starfish, a pink starfish, and a black starfish. It's really time to replace gold starfish pins with pond buttons.
Thank you. Wayne Seaton, followed by Bill Lysette.
Good afternoon, Mayor Sawyer and fellow councilmen and women. I am Wayne Seaton. I'm a homeowner on Old Ranch Drive in Santa Rosa, speaking on behalf of my wife and other homeowners in that area. As a member of our community in Bennett Valley, we acknowledge the value of sober living facilities for individuals recovering from substance abuse. Our hope was that Pura Vida could be a facility that blends in seamlessly with our neighborhood. However, after our initiating and meeting with the owners of Pura Vida last night, we are concerned that this will not be the case for the home now partially occupied at 3224 Old Ranch Drive. We do not believe that this facility was planned with planned housing for 16 men and women can provide the quality of care, comfort, and supervision promoted to prospective Pura Vida residents without negatively altering the environment of our neighborhood. The home will no longer serve as a normal single-family style home, but function more like a fraternity house with loosely administered rules. With a proposed large number of adults and visitors, we foresee a considerable increase in traffic noise, and potential safety issues. This situation will be exacerbated by the irregular turnover of resident short-term occupants, with the average stay projected by the management to be 6 months. Our neighborhood consists of small families which have resided in their homes for an average of over 20 years. We take pride in having maintained our homes and neighborhood with the assumption that city ordinances would protect our rural residential R20 living environment. At this time, we barely know the record of Pura Vida, as therefore we must question their ability of their inexperienced management and no professional credentials to run a sober living facility of this size without negatively affecting our living environment. It is important to mention that sober living housing industry is totally unregulated. and only needing to pass a zoning inspection in order to operate. Despite the merits of their mission, which we strongly support, we firmly believe that the large number of occupants in this facility is not appropriate for our single-family rural residential neighborhood. Based on our research, it appears that the current use of 3224 Old Ranch Drive by Pura Vida should be classified as a congregate group housing venture and therefore be limited to only 6 residents. We are calling for the city to impose an occupancy limit of 6 residents in this home. There are 2 other members of our community who would like to address the,
Thank you, Mr. Seaton.
the council. Thank you.
You bet. Bill, followed by Sue Alban.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Lysette, and I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, Roberta. We live at 3212 Old Ranch Drive, and we share the side property line with Pura Vida Sober Living home on 3224. We recognize and support the need to integrate into the community folks who are committed to turning their lives around. We have no disagreement with Pura Vida setting up a sober living environment next door to us, and we will support them and the residents. However, we strongly disagree with the large scale of their occupancy plans. 15 active young adults in a single residential home will generate a large amount of noise not seen anywhere else in the neighborhood. House rules provide for up to 3 visitors during a day, so that equates to a potential of 60 people on the property at one time. Regardless of how tightly Pura Vida manages the home, we believe it is simply not possible to keep the noise level down to what is typical at any other home in the community. And it is not possible to control the traffic, chaos, and cigarette smoke that will naturally come with so many people concentrated into a single home. The backyard at 3224 has a hot tub and a large lawn where football, soccer, and volleyball games could be played. The front yard has a basketball hoop. Imagine the noise that will be generated if 15 young men and women, plus up to 45 visitors, make full use of these amenities. Already, we've reported to the city problems with very loud, obnoxious conversations in the backyard and offensive foul language. And that is occurring with only 6 or 7 residents at the moment. Imagine what that will be like with 15 residents plus their visitors. Antelope Heights is zoned as rural residential. Pura Vida's plans are not consistent with the stated purpose of rural residential neighborhoods, and their plans also violate the rules governing congregate housing. Finally, we have deep concerns with Pura Vida's governance model. Pura Vida LLC is a for-profit company. In just 1 year, the 2 young owners of Pura Vida have established 4 sober living homes in Santa Rosa and Novato. Sober living homes are not regulated, and the two owners have no professional qualifications and little experience managing sober living homes. In conversation with the business owners yesterday, we learned that their income from the residents at 3224 will be $12,000 per month. We asked if they would consider reducing the number of residents, and they said no. We asked that the City Council to please put a reasonable, fair, and lawful limit on the number of residents, and we asked that the number be no more than 6. Any more than that will spoil the peaceful and private nature of our home and yard that we've enjoyed and treasured for 25 years. We agree to do our part in helping these young adults get their lives back on track. And we ask that the city please put a reasonable limit on the number of residents so that we too can continue to enjoy our home and backyard. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue Alban, followed by Peter Chernoff.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members.
Ms. Alban, if you could just speak into the mic a little closer. Thank you.
My name is Sue Alban, and my husband and I live at 3236 Old Ranch Drive. We live next door to number 3224, and of all the neighbors, we are the most affected due to our proximity to 3224. We returned from our vacation on June the 1st to learn that a profit-making company called Pura Vida LLC had moved in right next door and planned to rent out rooms to 15 young people and 1 supervisor. It's a sober house, and we were given no prior warning of this from either the owner or the property manager. The houses on Old Ranch Drive are staggered to preserve the rural and spacious feeling. 3236 and 3224 are grouped together with shared front landscaping and set back 180 feet from Old Ranch Drive. The front doors, however, are only 40 feet apart, and I have some photos here to show you that. Although over the past 24 years, proximity has never been a problem, with 15 occupants next door, together with their guests, we are now aware of constant foot traffic in and out of the house, of cars coming and going in the driveway, of smoking and audible swearing in the backyard, as well as of the general noise that comes with 15 young people living together in a house built in a neighborhood designed for single-family homes. The most worrying and concerning thing for us is that we now have lost the comfort and reassuring feeling of safety and stability gained from knowing and trusting one's neighbors. As long as our neighbors consist of 15 transient strangers living in such close proximity, set back 180 feet from the road, we are never going to regain that feeling of comfort and security. Even though we realize the benefits of sober living houses, we are worried about how this sober house is already negatively affecting our lives. We are extremely upset and disappointed, as this is not what we expected to happen when we built our house 24 years ago. We have met with Pura Vida, and since 15 occupants is very profitable for their company, each occupant pays $800 per month per resident, they refuse to reduce the numbers. At this point, we are destined to live next door what seems like a youth hostel, a fraternity sorority house, a dormitory, and certainly not a single-family home. This does not seem fair or just, and we are seeking your help. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could leave those with the clerk. Yep, the back. Thank you. No, I have a couple more. Mr. Turniff?
Yes, thank you. Fair or just? I'll tell you what, it's the promised land or bust. A beautiful fiddle, a supernatural riddle, or a sign by spirit for those who will hear it. Marcus and Carlos, evil or alive. California will be given a sign on the 4th of July. Here be 2 brothers of another mother. Who among you be looking after the other? They parted 40 years ago. What be their status quo? One be wealthy, the other on the street. Lessons in life can be quite bittersweet. King prophesies seeing the promised land. We need but name it and claim it by almighty command. So until that day, we all be homeless, my friends, as the world goes on forever and the party never ends. Deep spirituality, like a twilight zone, can sometimes feel leery. Which of these 2 brothers are really being tested? Yes, this be the query. One living on a mountaintop in the county of Marin, the other on the streets of Oakland. What be the true nature of sin? Both cities and counties filled with churches, yes, hundreds and hundreds of all denominations. Just do some net searches. Most all, of course, on their knees to the world of mammon, the very world maintaining Sataniel's backgammon. Yes, Carlos be a man of success and wealth, and Marcos the magnificent with talents and health, that at this moment appear rather spent, and so too on life support, still at Highland Hospital by the latest report. Where is the love the world is in need of? The most beautiful thing that ever will see, be in realizing the power and authority of prophecy. For as surely as King saw the promised land, and taking this promise by the prophetic 40-day freedom strike as almighty command. The prophecy I've shared over 21 years, now the entire world walks a true trial of tears. Join ye this mission in tune with the cosmic physician and celestial musician. The 40-day strike, the promised land will requisition. A magical, mystical breath from the north will awaken Marcus on the July the 4th, saith the seer, the sage, now 2 warriors engage, for all to see, the strike has been received from the Almighty, Creator, Liberator. We're under a baptism of fire, destined to take us higher. And as you do unto the least of me was always a reference to the animals you see. For the vampires cannot see the light, which is the truth. Look around, there's more than substantial proof. And rumor is that Santana is a vegan. And I'll finish by telling you I'm sorry to hear about Sirach, the young Eritrean poet. I didn't know his name, although I spoke to him many times over the last 2 years, and he was a very kind, gentle soul.
Thank you, Mr. Chernoff. David Jasper, followed by Bob Shield.
Hello, I'm David Jasper, and my wife, Joni Jasper, is back there. I want to acknowledge, in regard to priorities, having heard about the challenges for Camp Michaela, that what we're appealing for may not fit in some of those other priorities, but I do appreciate the opportunity to ask for your help. We're directly across the street from the house currently operating as Pura Vida Sober Living. We've met the owners of Pura Vida, and they were well-intentioned young men who have put together a thriving enterprise in less than a year. We admire the nature of the work they're doing, and we congratulate them that they can operate boarding houses so profitably. Unfortunately, for a for-profit facility such as this, it belongs in a community more compatible with a higher density. Pura Vida intends on having, as you've heard, 16 residents in one house, which is surrounded by single-family dwellings. Each resident may have 3 visitors, unless they are approved for more. Each resident and each of the 3 visitors may have a vehicle. The average stay for each resident is about 3 to 6 months. Over the course of a year, the sheer numbers of strangers coming and going will be overwhelming. My appeal to you is not just another NIMBY situation, not in my backyard. The awful truth is that Pura Vida's choice of this house is a mistake. The house is set far back from the street and street lights in such a manner that its closest neighbor, the home of Rod and Sue Albin, who you just heard from Sue Albin, is extraordinarily intimate. For years, I have always noted how my stroll down their dark driveway placed me in such a private spot between 2 front doors. Although the Pura Vida owners are confident that they can manage, with no professional credentials of their own, the rotating population of recovering addicts, I'm less confident in the large number of those addicts' friends. I know that I would be frightened for my own mother, my wife, or my children encountering a group of strangers so close in the dark. They may very well be good and safe people, yet still they are strangers, far off the street, in a very intimate setting. We acknowledge that the city has every reason to encourage viable sober living facilities. The city also has every reason to ensure that the placement of those facilities is compatible and appropriate within such a small community of single-family homes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Bob Shield.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Cheel. I'm with the Homeless Task Force of the First United Methodist Church, longtime resident of Santa Rosa, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor and the rest of the City Council for your time. Welcome back, Mr. Oliveras. As you may know, we've been meeting regularly with members of the City Council, with groups such as Catholic Charities, the Santa Rosa Junior College, the various housing authorities here within the city and also in the county, to try to come up with a solution that can help the homeless. There are so many homeless there, obviously, in our area who are looking to pick themselves up and be and move on from their situation. We would love to be able to help them as Methodist Church, to be able to help them with a solution. It is a problem that we all face. And what I'm here to do essentially is to celebrate 2 things. Number one, celebrate very much that the CHAP discussion is on the agenda for July 19th. That's very exciting because secondly, what that would do is create a possible legal solution for us to be able to do, put together a program on our property there at Stony Point Road. The simple fact is that what we would love to see in this CHAP is a broad language that says tents are allowed. Right now, I know that's a parking program, but tents are allowed, possibly even alternative vehicles such as tiny houses on wheels, but also that those be allowed to remain 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It would not certainly be practical for someone to plant a tent and then take it down the next morning and go, even though that would make it not visible during the day, right? If visibility is an issue in the CHAP program, then perhaps a fence or a screen fence could help solve that problem. But I think that if we want to provide a solution that provides safety and security and a place where a person can leave their stuff, know it's going to stay, go out there and work, and get a job or go to school, as the junior college students are doing. We're just wanting to help find a solution, and again, celebrating the fact that CHAP may be exactly that solution for us. But please, broad language. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cheel. Ms. Collins, did you have a comment?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the comments from the neighbors who have come out today to talk to us. And I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. First, how do we move forward that conversation?
I think we're going to need more information, Councilmember. We're here, we're hearing, we've conferred about it. We're going to look at the issue, but I would have to say this was not a scheduled agenda item, and so we're going to need to defer some of these questions, and we will get back to the council about what we discover.
One of my questions that I would like to have come back in the conversation is, do we have any limitation on the number of unrelated people who live in housing? Is there any regulation about that? So if you could also answer that question when you come back, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Wrap your car around that light pole because you was caring more about that thing than the road.
I knew she liked me.
Not anymore.
No text message is worth a life.
Over 90 miles of creeks run through Santa Rosa. Runoff from streets, roofs, and parking lots